the News UK building.
Oh, you're right. Final count. It's over now, isn't it? I think what do you reckon? 80% have voted.
It's possible, but we're going to be time limited. Please treat this like it's a theatre. So be thoroughly polite and respectful. Clap if you feel the need to clap, or even cheer if you feel a desperate need to cheer. But please no interaction, not too much heckling. Ideally, no heckling at all. The more you heckle, the more you shout, the less time we have to pin them down about what we all want to know about. Hope that's perfectly explainable. Can you all just clap?
UK building in London. This is the final showdown. Jeremy Hunt versus Boris Johnson. Brought to you by The Sun and talkRADIO.
Good evening and welcome to The Sun's Tory leadership debate here at News UK's headquarters by London Bridge. It's the final showdown, the last head-to-head between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt, before one of these two men is chosen to become our next Prime Minister in just 8 days' time. My name is Tom Newton-Dunn and I'm the political editor of The Sun. Over the next 90 minutes, together with talkRADIO, we'll invite our readers, listeners and ordinary Conservative Party members here in the audience with us to put their questions directly to the candidates. We want to find out their plans to deliver Brexit really stack up, how they will solve a raft of other problems back home, and whether they have the character to do the toughest job in the land. To begin, each candidate will give a 1-minute long opening statement. We tossed a coin just now. Jeremy won and chose to go second. Just the coin toss. So Boris will start. Mr. Johnson, your opening statement, please.
Thank you very much. Well, good evening, everybody. This country faces a momentous choice. We can either continue with the same old, failed, can-kicking approach, destroying trust in politics and sapping business confidence, or else we can change, get back our mojo, and put ourselves on the path to long-term success. And the way to do that is to get Brexit done by October the 31st. And then to unite our country with more money for our schools, more police out on the beat, full fibre broadband for all, and then as Conservatives to make our case again to the country with renewed power and conviction that to have fantastic infrastructure and public services, you must have a dynamic market economy. Because that is how we beat the semi-Marxist wealth and job-destroying lunacy of Jeremy Corbyn. And as somebody who campaigned for Brexit and who believes in it, and who has a plan to unite this country, and by the way, long experience of defeating the London Labour left, I believe I'm the right person to unleash on this project now, and I hope I can count on your support.
Mr. Johnson, thank you. Mr. Hunt, your opening statement.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Sun readers, talkRADIO listeners want two things from our next Prime Minister. They want to deliver Brexit and stop Corbyn. Fail on either, and it'll be a disaster for our democracy and a disaster for ordinary people, ordinary families up and down the country. I will deliver both. On Brexit, if people think with their heads as well as their hearts, they will see that my way of delivering Brexit is more likely to get us out by the 31st of October, because I have a plan for no deal, but also the ability to negotiate a deal that can get through the Houses of Parliament. But being Prime Minister is not just about what you promise, it's about what you can deliver. And I delivered with Boris the London Olympics. I delivered more doctors and nurses for the NHS. I have been responsible for our foreign policy at a time of international tension, and now I will deliver for our country with plans to fire up our economy, sort out our education system, make us walk tall in the world with more investment in our armed forces, and get more young people to vote Conservative. Most of all, I offer the calm, determined leadership that has always and will always make our country great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hunt. So we'll get to the questions immediately. We'll look at Brexit for the first half of the debate because it is extremely important. Gentlemen, just two rules. First, no speeches. You just have one, you'll get one at the end. Second, please do not talk over each other. To the first question, and it's Luke Black. Thank you.
You wouldn't do that, would you, Boris?
Luke Black. Our first question, and Luke is a member of the Conservative Party.
Hi, hello. I'm here with a group called Blue Beyond of Young Conservatives, and a lot of us have not yet decided who we're going to vote for. One thing that we'd really want to know is, why do you think that you're the right person to deliver Brexit after two people have failed to do so already? Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, please.
Well, I think, Luke, there's a very simple reason. I think for 3 years we've had a lot of drift and dither and indecision about the fundamental questions of what Brexit means. And I campaign for Brexit. I believe in it. I understand that to do it properly, you must come out of the customs union. You must come out of the single market. Otherwise, there's frankly no sense in it. And I think what Brussels will get at long last from me, they will get somebody who has that clarity of vision, which I think will be incredibly welcome to our friends and partners in Brussels as well as in the country. I think we've had a lot of defeatism, a lot of negativity, and I think that the EU will respond now to some real clarity of purpose in the free trade deal that we're going to do.
Mr. Hunt, would you like to respond?
Thank you. Well, Luke, the question is not about the willingness or desire to get out of the EU by the 31st of October. Whichever way we voted in the referendum, we are Democrats in the Conservative Party. We know the greatest thing about our country as one of the oldest and most robust democracies in the world is that people like Boris and I do what the people tell us to do, and that's why we are going to leave. The question is, who has the plan to do it? And if we look at no deal, I don't think there's a huge difference between me and Boris. We're both willing to leave without a deal, if that is the only way to leave. But counting on no deal, when you've got MPs in Parliament who are actively trying to block a no-deal Brexit, they succeeded in March, they're trying now, they will try again this autumn. That is the high-risk way of leaving. The low-risk way is to send to Brussels a Prime Minister who can actually negotiate a deal that can get through Parliament. And I've got the detailed plan to do that. I've worked out how I would get my negotiating team to put together a deal that can get through Parliament. I've thought through how we're going to persuade the European Commission to unpick that deal that they've said they won't unpick. I don't say it's going to be easy, but it's not impossible. And if you choose the right person, this can be done.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, the last deal took 2 years to negotiate. You still want a deal, I think. You've got 100 days. Europe's on holiday for about half of that. You've also got to pass that into law. It's completely unrealistic.
Well, I don't think it's remotely unrealistic. There are valid interlocutors across the European Union, and they will want to be doing a deal with us. They have all sorts of reasons, I think, for wanting to get this thing over the line. They don't want to have the Brexit party continuing to occupy the airwaves in Strasbourg in the way that they are. They're the largest single group. Anne Widdecombe's fantastic, but there's a limit, I think, to the amount they want to hear from her in the EU. There's the question of the 39 billion, which is a very considerable incentive for our friends and partners. And I may say this is one of the difficulties of these debates. Is I don't really want to, in any way, to disagree with anything that Jeremy says, but I'm forced by the logic of the argument. I do think it is wrong not to prepare very robustly now for a no-deal Brexit in case we don't get the deal that we want. Clearly, what we need to do is have a smooth exit by which they protract the existing arrangements, zero tariff, zero quota. But it's also right, at the same time, to get ready to come out without an agreement, isn't it? That's what it's simple business sense. And I think that we can prepare and that we must prepare. And the country was virtually ready in March the 29th. And I don't think we will carry any conviction with our friends and partners over the channel unless they look into our eyes and see that we are absolutely determined to come out of the EU on October the 31st, come what may. And that's what I will deliver.
Mr. Hunt?
Well, I have every bit as much passion as Boris about getting out by the 31st of October. But you know something? The worst moment in British politics in the last year. Sorry, I didn't hear didn't we have a pact, Boris? We weren't going to talk over each other.
It was a very, very gentle murmur.
Okay. Well, let me say this. The worst moment in British politics in the last year was when we failed to leave the EU by the end of March. We as Conservatives, Boris and I at the last election and then repeatedly, we promised Sun readers, talkRADIO listeners, families up and down this country that we would be out by the end of March. And we betrayed that trust when we failed to do that. Now, right now, Boris is guaranteeing something that he knows neither he nor I can truly guarantee, because we don't know what Parliament will do. We don't have a majority in Parliament, and we can hope, and I would urge my colleagues not to take no deal off the table. I think it's one of the most dangerous and destructive things they can do when we're trying to get a deal, but we can't control what Parliament does, and I don't want to betray that trust a second time. The way that we will do this is by going to Brussels, having a constructive tone, but total and utter determination. They need to know that we are leaving. They need to know that we have got some sensible plans, which I think we do have, and then I think we've got a chance. But I will say this, Tom, to answer your question about timing very directly. If we got a deal, and I've said I will give the EU until the end of September to see whether there is a serious prospect of a deal. So that's the month of August, constructing that deal that can get through Parliament, the month of September, talking to the EU. If we have a deal and it needs a few more days to get through Parliament and we haven't got there by the end of October, then I would allow it those extra days. And I see a lady shaking her head here. Because I don't believe that the people of this country would want in that situation for us to rip up a deal that was just a matter of days away. But there's something else. If you take the view that you will absolutely rip up any deal that you may have at the end of September, however close it is to becoming law, if you took that view, you will encourage all those MPs in Parliament who want to stop us leaving without a deal to bring down the government in a vote of confidence. And so I say very frankly...
Can Mr Johnson respond to that?
Yeah, no, I will, but I just make my point. If you get this wrong, you will end up in an election before Brexit. And the one person who will never, ever deliver Brexit is Jeremy Corbyn. And that would be the most dangerous thing of all.
I'm just anxious that we don't send out a signal to the rest of the EU that we're willing to contemplate another delay. I think it's absolutely absurd. We said on March the 29th that we were going to delay until April the 8th. That turned out then to be a delay of another 6 months. I'm hearing that that Jeremy might delay for a few days. Well, how many days? Is that 3 days? Is that 6 days? You've said you'd be prepared to wait until Christmas. Which Christmas is it? I think that what the EU want and need to know is that this country is robust. This country is self-confident. We're going to come out of the EU on October the 31st. And may I just point out
you've done a good job pointing a lot out. We
point out that the legal position, so just very important point, Tom, sorry.
Very quick.
In a nutshell, the legal position is that we do come out. The momentum is with exit on October the 31st, unless the UK government actually asks for a further delay and the EU gives us another delay. So let's get on. Let's not go down that madness. Let's avoid that and come out on October the 31st. That's what the people want.
Thank you. You've also promised me no long speeches, so we haven't stuck to that one either. Before we move on, quickly, Mr. Johnson, under your...
very brief for Boris.
Thank you.
I thought Jeremy went on for an awful long time.
Gentlemen, under your plans, Mr. Johnson, for immigration,
yes,
because some readers do care about this, and quickly before we move on, will immigration come down?
Well, the point of what I want to see with immigration is control. And
will immigration, will the numbers come down?
Well, I'm not going to get into some numbers game with you, Tom. I think what we will have is control, which is what the people voted for, and it's high time they got it. And we will take back control of immigration. We'll have an Australian-style points-based system so that we welcome to this country the people who want to contribute to this country, but that we are able democratically to control it and to ensure that the UK economy, the interests of UK citizens are properly represented in those discussions.
Mr. Hunt, will net immigration come down under you?
Thank you. Well, I actually agree with Boris about taking back control. That's what people voted for, but they also voted with an expectation that overall levels of net migration would come down. And I believe that people would think we were betraying the spirit of that Brexit referendum if we didn't find a way of bringing down overall numbers. The way that we do it, though, is what I did in the NHS, which is by increasing the number of doctors and nurses that we train in this country so that we don't need to bring in so many from other countries. So it's boosting the education and skills levels of our own people that's the right way to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Let's go to our second question from the audience, and this is from Andrew Snarsky, who is a disaffected Tory voter. Andrew.
Gentlemen, the question I ask for both Boris and Jeremy is, who should the great British public put their trust in over Brexit and other issues, Boris or Jeremy?
Well, Andrew, I think I'm afraid modesty would normally forbid me from advertising my own credentials, but there's nothing for it tonight. I'm going to argue to you that I think it's time we had somebody who campaigned for Brexit, who believes in it, who understands it, put in charge of this. I think we've had a lot of confusion and drift and dither for 3 years. It's time we made a positive case for this extraordinary project on which the nation has embarked. Brexit offers plenty of opportunities. We've had so much negativity, so much defeatism, I'm afraid even from parts of the UK government about what we can do. I think the people of this country are entirely fed up of being told that they can't do X, Y, or Z, and it's time they had a leader who believes in this country, who believes in what we can do, and who wants to seize a truly global future. And that's my ambition.
Mr. Johnson. Mr. Hunt, you don't believe in this country, according to Mr. Johnson.
Andrew, who do the country trust? Boris, to put a smile on your face, and he does it better than anyone. But if you actually want the detailed delivery of Brexit, you have got to have a plan. You've got to have someone who the EU are prepared to sit down the negotiating table with and discuss the nitty-gritty of the backstop, the single biggest issue that we have failed to overcome to date. And the British people have also got to have a Prime Minister they know will not make promises that he cannot keep. And that is the most fundamental thing in politics. So sometimes that means someone who is going to grasp all those details and actually work out how we're going to get through these negotiations. And sometimes that means not saying things that are very appealing, like a so-called guarantee of leaving on a particular date, which I think Boris said to me last week that he wouldn't be prepared to resign if he didn't deliver it, which says to me that he's not quite so sure that he can guarantee it either. And let's be clear, what people want. I think Boris is going to come in now, but let's be clear. What people want is calm leadership and delivery, and that's
Johnson.
what I offer.
Well, if I may say so, if I may say, we had exactly that approach for the last 3 years. We had all sorts of promises that we were going to leave on March the 29th. We were told a calm, methodical approach to the negotiations. I'm afraid it delivered absolutely nothing for the country because there was no clarity and no decision making about the fundamental issues. And what is needed now is somebody who can get to the core of the argument, who can see what the real issue is, and that is, I'm afraid, that our EU friends and partners are only too happy to collaborate with elements in the UK government who would like to keep us pretty much locked in to the EU system. So what we need now is somebody who's genuinely willing to take us out of the EU. And that is what we will do on October the 31st. And I have no embarrassment or hesitation in repeating that deadline.
Mr. Hunt, both you and Mr. Johnson are up for a no-deal Brexit, if that's what it takes. Neither of you particularly want one. What if the House of Commons blocks your no-deal Brexit? What's your plan B, Mr. Hunt?
Well, the plan B is, the plan A is actually not to get there by negotiating a deal. And the way you minimise the risk of that happening is by maximising your chances of getting a deal, by having a plan over August and September, by sending a Prime Minister that the EU will have those very, very difficult conversations with. And I would say this, that the reason that we've not got to where we wanted to get to by this stage is not because of calm leadership, which I think Theresa May did show. It is because she had the wrong deal. And Boris and I were both in the cabinet in December 2017.
I resigned it.
You resigned. Actually, Boris, let's be clear. Let's just actually get a little bit of accuracy here. You didn't resign when the backstop was agreed in December 2017. You stayed in the cabinet. You were actually Foreign Secretary when that backstop was agreed, and that is the main reason why this deal didn't get through the House of Commons. Now we need to have a plan. I, by the way, voted for that backstop 3 times. You voted for it once before you mentioned it, and that is because I wanted us to be out of the EU today, and I would have preferred to have dealt with the problems of the backstop now, having left the EU, I think we'd have been in a better position as a country. But be that as it may, the deal that is going to get through the House of Commons, the deal that is going to get us out of the EU, won't have that backstop. And that's what we've got to put right. And I think we've got a plan with technology, with trusted trader schemes, with a different approach to the one that we had, which kept us in the customs union, and that's what will succeed.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Mr. Johnson, you've said a no-deal Brexit would be vanishingly inexpensive if we prepare properly. My question is...
If we prepare properly.
Exactly.
If we prepare
So how
properly.
much is it going to cost to prepare properly?
It depends how well we prepare. And I think, and we can make a very important point.
Well, can you answer that question? Because it doesn't sound like you've costed
I'm not going to give I'm not going to try to.
So you haven't costed a no deal.
No, the Treasury will produce all sorts of spine-chilling figures. Of course, it will. But actually, I think that if we get our act together in the way that we can minimise the costs of Brexit under any circumstances, and we can turn it into a fantastic opportunity. And the sad thing about the last 3 years is that actually you've had people in the UK government, senior figures, saying that a no-deal Brexit would be such a catastrophe that business hasn't even really been properly preparing for it. If you look at the 147,000 SMEs, small, medium-sized businesses that trade only with the rest of the EU, they haven't known what to do. Some of them have acquired the relevant customs forms. Most of them, 2/3 of them, haven't, because they keep hearing from the Treasury that a no-deal Brexit is completely unthinkable. The more we prepare, the better our preparations, the smoother Brexit under any circumstances.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Hunt, very quick comeback, if you want one.
Well, there are real costs for businesses, and they don't go away by pretending that if you introduce a 40% tariff on lamb exports to the EU, that doesn't provide a real cost to farmers. They might lose their European markets overnight. You know, on steel it'd be an 11% tariff. So there are real costs. I've announced a £6 billion plan of support for farmers and the fishing community, and a £14 billion plan of support for small businesses up and down the country with big cuts in corporation tax. So I think you can minimise the costs of a no-deal Brexit, but I don't think you can say they're vanishingly small.
Thank you. We're going to go to our next question, another Brexit question, which is about the Northern Ireland peace process. And this is from Lewis Frisbee, who's also a member of the Conservative Party.
Good evening, gentlemen. So I was fortunate enough in university to be able to study the Good Friday Agreement and the Northern Ireland peace process. And I was wondering, how would you make sure the Good Friday Agreement is protected in a no-deal Brexit scenario?
Well,
Mr. Johnson.
Well, thank you so much. And I think all sides agree that the text of the Good Friday Agreement must be respected and will continue to be respected. And I think all sides also agree that there is no need whatever to have hard infrastructure, to have physical checks at the border in Northern Ireland. And we won't do that. We, the UK government, won't do that. I can't believe that I don't think Jeremy would want to see that, but nobody wants to see that. And we certainly don't think that our friends in Dublin will want to see that either. And indeed, the European Commission is confident that such checks will not be necessary. So I think we need to approach this and Jeremy has spoken about trusted trader schemes and checks away from the border. That's entirely right. Let's bring that spirit of optimism to this problem. You can solve the problem of frictionless trade at the Northern Irish border and elsewhere, but the correct place to do it, logically, is in the discussions on the free trade agreement that we will conclude after we have left on October the 31st. That's how to do it.
Mr. Hunt.
Well, Lewis, I met a couple of weeks ago someone from Newry, which is one of the border towns. And he was saying that in the time of the Troubles, they had unemployment of around 20%. But now, since the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, it's gone down to 2%, a total transformation. And the one thing that they all say is that we cannot have hard border infrastructure because that would be a target for terrorists and would then put the whole peace process at risk. And that peace process, I think, by the way, is one of the greatest achievements of the last 20, 30 years, and we should all be very proud of that. So we need to find a solution, but it's got to be a solution that doesn't trap us in the customs union. And the problem with the backstop was that we were trapped in the customs union until such time as the EU deigned to give us permission to leave the customs union, which is why I always judged that it was never going to get through the House of Commons. And so I think the best proposals are ones that have been put together by two brilliant Conservative MPs, Greg Hands and Nicky Morgan. They've got something called the Alternative Arrangements Commission. They've got a report that's 202 pages long. But basically, it deals with the issue of technology. And it says that it can be done on existing technology. We don't need new technology. It also says that it wouldn't be possible to get this technology up and running immediately. It will take some time to do that. So you need a period of time while you're getting it up and running. And it would also be a combination of checks away from the borders. If you look at, for example, factories exporting from France to Switzerland, their trucks are often not stopped at the Swiss border. They're checked at either end. So put all those things together. Why do I really think this can be done? Because that's what Michel Barnier once let slip. He was talking about their plans for a no-deal Brexit.
Mr. Hunt, sorry to interject, but the EU have already said they're not going to deal with alternative arrangements. They're not going to reopen the withdrawal agreement at all. It's all well and good, but they're not going to listen.
Well, actually, what they said was they've accepted that there is a long-term solution in technology. What they're saying is, at the moment, they don't believe that the technology is there. But that, I think, is because, and I'm sure Boris would agree with this, because they obviously like the backstop when that was on the table, because that keeps us trapped in the customs
You're in
union,
danger of breaking out into a furious
I like
agreement.
the way Jeremy is talking now.
Good,
I like the new spirit of optimism.
Good. Join my cabinet, Boris.
Come on.
Before we...
I wouldn't be so impertinent.
I'm just inviting you. I think you're showing a lot of talent this evening.
I wouldn't be so impertinent as to use this opportunity to lobby you for a job.
Mr. Johnson, thank you.
You're so modest, Boris. It's one of your great qualities.
I may say,
talking over each other.
I do. Sorry, forgive me. I just do think that what Jeremy has said is incredibly exciting and important, because there are solutions. We can get over the problem of frictionless border at the Northern Irish border. All the more reason, therefore, to remit those solutions to the place that they logically belong, which is after we've come out on October the 31st, and to commit to a hard deadline, which I think this country will.
One quick question before we move on to the pair of you. If the EU do agree to have a look at the backstop again, would you accept a 5-year time limit for it? Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Tom. I think that the problems with the backstop, and I said I'm not attracted, in a nutshell, no, is the answer, no. To time limits or unilateral escape hatches, or all these kind of elaborate devices, glosses, codicils, and so on that you could apply to the backstop. I think that the problem is very fundamental. It is really there. It has been devised by this country as an instrument of our own incarceration within the customs union and the single market. And
I'll take that note. I'll take that note.
To come out.
Mr. Hunt, would you?
The backstop, as it is dead. And so I agree with Boris. I don't think tweaking it with a time limit will do the trick. We've got to find a new way. But the thing that mustn't die, and if we're going to get a deal agreed, we will have to recognise this, is an absolute cast iron commitment to the Republic of Ireland that we will not have border infrastructure. So what they liked in the backstop was the fact that it guaranteed that. If we're going to solve this, we've got to find another way of guaranteeing them that same thing. And I think Boris and I both think there is potential to do that.
And that is the right way forward.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to go to the next question. Dina Hallett has the next question. Dina is also a member of the Conservative Party. Dina. Deanna, I'm so sorry.
That's fine. Completely hypothetical situation, but potentially very real. In the event that your deal cannot get through, would you rather a second referendum or a general election?
Mr. Hunt.
Neither.
Neither. I would rather. You do have to address the question.
Yes, no, I've said exactly, and it is precisely because I will not accept either of those that I think it is dangerous to have that hard deadline that Boris has been talking about. Because if you're saying, as I think Boris, I'm just going to quote those exact words: "Do or die, come what may," you're going to leave on that date. If Parliament then blocks that, the only thing you can do to keep that promise to the British people is change Parliament, have an election. And I think if we have an election before we've left the European Union, we just need to look at what happened at the Peterborough by-election. We got squeezed by the Brexit Party on the right, the Lib Dems on the left. Who came through the middle? The Labour Party. Incredibly dangerous. And all the polls show, it doesn't matter who our next Prime Minister is, it would be the same result if we have an election before we've Brexited. We would have a Labour, Lib Dem, SNP coalition and no Brexit at all.
Mr. Johnson, which would you choose?
Say, I think that I refuse to choose between either of those options. I dimly recollect that my advocacy recommended a second referendum after
democratic endorsement, and that we had with the general election.
Oh, you wanted a democratic endorsement.
We had it with the general election.
Sorry, I misunderstood in that case. Forgive me, but I don't want either a second referendum or a general election. But I think that what will increase the risk of a general election, and indeed increase the risk of a Corbyn government, is if we continually kick the can down the road. And I don't know whether you noticed, but at the recent European Parliament elections, our great party, the Conservative Party, scored a staggering 8.8% in the poll because people are totally fed up and they see us failing to get Brexit across the line. They now hear yet again, that we're prepared to dither and drift and delay beyond the deadline of October.
Mr. Johnson, we saw that. We saw the European election results. We followed that one.
I don't think we will easily recover if we delay again.
Can I ask you, you said at the ITV debate last week, you mentioned the forthcoming election. Rather sounds like you're planning one. What do you mean by forthcoming election?
Well, obviously there will, this country will remain an elective democracy, and we will have a...
but forthcoming sounds quite soon.
Not even the Sun has any plans to change that, I trust. We will, particularly not the Sun, I should say. And we will have an election at some stage in 2022.
So you will rule out a general election?
2022.
Mr. Johnson, you'll rule out a general election before Brexit is delivered?
Absolutely. I think, as I've just said, I think it would be the height of folly. There are several points. First of all, I think the people of this country are utterly fed up with politicians coming back to them with more elections and offering more referendums and all the rest of it. It's totally wrong. What they want us to do is get on and deliver what they told us to do on June the 23rd, 2016, and they're fed up with waiting.
How are you going to govern with a majority of 3? Because that's what you're facing. People might defect, people might go upstairs, anything could happen.
I think that the politics has changed since March the 29th, when we failed to come out, and I think that lots of our colleagues, Jeremy and I's colleagues not just on the Conservative benches, but on Labour benches as well, can see this fatal hemorrhage of trust to the Brexit Party and to the Liberal Democrats, because they're both basically feeding on the same decay, like twin puffballs, as it were, saprophytically feeding on the same sense of decay and trust in politics. And until we get Brexit done, they will continue to attract hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of votes. And that's why we've got to turn this thing round, be very determined, and get Brexit over the line by October the 31st.
Mr. Hunt.
Well, I'm not sure that we got an answer to Deanna's question there, because if we forget, well, this is not just about optimism and hope. Both of us want to leave by October the 31st. Both of us hope Parliament doesn't block a no-deal Brexit, but it did block a no-deal Brexit just in March. And there are people who are trying to do exactly the same thing, and we may have a reduced majority which I very much hope we don't, we lose the forthcoming by-election. And so that is why I think we've got to be very careful. If we get this wrong, we will trip ourselves into an accidental general election long before October the 31st, and we will give the keys of Downing Street to someone who will never deliver Brexit. And that will be the biggest betrayal of all. So this is not just about the determination and hunger to do what the British people told us to do, which is to get out of the EU. This is also about having a sensible plan that maximises our chances of doing it. And I don't think that it is being any less enthusiastic about Brexit to be honest with people about the challenges we face, because I think we're more likely to overcome those challenges if we face them head on rather than pretend they don't exist.
Thank you. Thank you. You're listening to the final showdown, a head-to-head debate between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt, live on The Sun and Talk Radio. We go to our final Brexit question, please. And this is from Rachel Cole, who's also a Tory member.
How likely is a trade deal with the US once we have left the EU with all the demands the US will put on us?
I'll go
Mr. Hunt.
Well, I actually think it is very likely. And I think that we may talk about some of the other things that President Trump has done or said recently later on in this debate. But I would say that one of the things that has most impressed me every time I've met him and every time I've met people in his administration, it is stressed how enthusiastic the US are to do a trade deal with us. And when we are trying to encourage the EU to do a trade deal with us, around half our exports go to the EU, then I think one of the best bits of leverage we have is to be making very good progress in the discussions that we have in a trade deal with the United States. I don't think it's something that we will be able to do incredibly quickly. Trump is a very shrewd and tough negotiator. But, and I think Boris has also said this, I think this is something we should go for as quickly as we can, and it will help us get the trade deal we need with Europe.
Mr. Hunt, you have avoided the point of the question, I think, if you don't mind me saying so, which is the US are going to have quite a few demands for us for this trade deal. We know them all: chlorinated chicken, private healthcare provision, massive amounts of cheap US grain. You'll sign up to all of those, or will you sign up to none of this?
Well, let's just knock on the head one of those, because we are not going to put the NHS up for sale in any trade deal. We've made that clear, and actually President Trump has also made that clear that that wasn't what he meant in some comments of his that were misinterpreted. Not the first time some of his comments have been misinterpreted. But look, this will be a trade deal where there will be some difficult negotiations, which is why I don't think it's going to happen overnight. But they are very keen to do something. And I actually think with goodwill on both sides, which I think there would be on this occasion, I think we could do a trade deal which doesn't affect the standards, the high standards we have in our agriculture industry here, and gets us that incredible market access that could be so good for our farmers and fishermen.
Mr. Johnson, do you accept there is a price to pay if you want to do a deal with the US? They give us something, we've got to give them something. What are we going to give?
Well, I certainly think that we can start trade negotiations with the US right away. The biggest and most important trade deal will of course be with our European Union.
Boris, sorry, we can't. It's illegal under EU law.
But no, you can begin negotiating a trade deal as soon as you've left. Of course you can, and we should do that. And we can't at the moment because we have a duty of sincere cooperation, as you know. But once we've left on October the 31st, correct? We will be able to. Jeremy, note. We will be able to.
My birthday's on the 1st of November, so I actually do know this part of the year very well.
We will be able to do a free trade.
And it's going to be a great birthday present when Prime Minister Jeremy Hunt delivers Brexit.
Mr. Hunt.
It will be. It will be. Could I? Amen to that, Jeremy. But listen, just on your question about doing a free trade deal with Trump, it is very important that we are realistic about this, because I remember covering a lot of the Uruguay round. I watched the way the Americans negotiate. They are ruthless. They will be very, very tough with us. And yes, as Jeremy is right, there will be, or perhaps it was Tom actually. I'm sure you're right about something, Jeremy. But Tom was right when he said they will put tough conditions, whether it's on accepting US agricultural products or whatever. That doesn't mean it's impossible to do a great deal. There are ways in which we can open up US markets, whether it's in services, in aviation, and there are things that we want to export to the UK agricultural products that they still won't have in America. Haggis, for instance. Yep, okay. And the Americans ban haggis.
Chlorinated chicken.
And I'm not in favour of doing anything, of importing anything from the United States that involves lower animal welfare standards or lower hygiene in the UK. And we should use our negotiating leverage with the states. And if they want to do it, and Donald Trump is very clear he wants to do a free trade deal. Fantastic. Well, let's encourage that. But we should use that as an incentive to get them to lift their standards to match ours if they want to do a free trade deal. I think that's the sensible way forward.
Mr. Hunt, the Chancellor today said a trade deal with the US within 12 months of us leaving the EU after Brexit is going to be impossible. Do you agree with the Chancellor of the government you're in?
I think he's right to say that it's challenging. I don't know of trade deals of that complexity that have been completed within 12 months. What I would say is that this is a very unusual American administration, and they want to do things differently. And I think that there is tremendous will on their side. And I really do think there is tremendous will to do something quickly. So whether we could do it in 12 months or not, I don't know. But I think we could do it a lot faster than would be the norm.
Mr. Johnson, sort of go over slightly old ground, but there's still some doubt whether you're going to stand up to Donald Trump, isn't there? Kim Darroch last week, by your own words on Friday, these were your words on Friday, you said you could have been more emphatic that Kim Darroch had my support. So you did let him down a bit.
Look, I was very sad that when Kim resigned, and I rang him to say that. And clearly, what I said to him and what I said in the debate is is the most important thing, that I stand foursquare behind our officials, our diplomats, when they write memos or diptels to politicians, to their political masters. They've got to be able to express themselves in whatever language they choose without fear or favour, and it's up to their political masters to decide how to take that. I think the real culprit in all this is the individual who leaked this stuff, and I want him or her to be found out and properly prosecuted for clearly breaking the terms of their employment.
Mr. Hunt, do you want to come back on that?
Well, look, I don't want to talk about what Boris did, but I just want to make this point that we have one of the best diplomatic networks in the world in this country. It's actually the third biggest after America and China, and our diplomats are bloody brilliant. And one of the reasons that we have so much influence in the world is because our diplomats are really respected, and they have to know that they can talk without fear or favour, give us their total, unvarnished, honest personal views about the countries they're in. And so I am very, very sad that we've lost one of our very best ones, and I hope that all our diplomats, there's 13,000 people in the Foreign Office, recognise that after this they really will get 150% support from the entire British government and British establishment, because we owe no less to them.
Thank you. Mr. Hunt, thank you. Who should appoint Kim Darroch's successor, Theresa May or the next Prime Minister?
Well, I think there's a constitutional convention in a situation like this. It is the Prime Minister's job to decide both who that person should be and the timescale. Normally it would take longer than a couple of weeks to go through that process, and he was due to retire at the end of the year, and there is a sort of process that's in its earlier stages. If she wanted to expedite it, normally she would consult her potential successors before coming to a final decision. But I haven't heard anything on that front, so I don't know what's going to happen.
Mr. Johnson, do you want to appoint Kim Darroch if you're Prime Minister, or Kim Darroch's successor?
Look, I think that there's a very clear process to be gone through, and there's no need to accelerate it. And Sir Kim's successor will be appointed in the normal way. And if I'm lucky enough to be successful in this contest, I would, of course, do that myself.
You wouldn't insist on it being you? You wouldn't insist on it being you?
Sorry, well,
you wouldn't insist on it being you?
Yes, of course, and I think any Prime Minister...
Theresa May not doing it and the next Prime Minister doing it.
I think any Prime Minister would insist on having a say, I mean, working with the Foreign Secretary, having a say in the appointment of a hugely important diplomat in our most important ally. Of course he would.
Mr. Hunt, Theresa May has condemned President Trump today for telling 4 black and Asian congresswomen, and a Hispanic one as well, to, and I quote President Trump here, go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came. Theresa May has called that completely unacceptable. Do you agree with her?
Yes, I do. I have 3 half-Chinese children, and if anyone, and they're British citizens, born on the NHS, and if anyone ever said to them, go back to China, I would be utterly appalled. And I would say something else. It is totally un-British to do that. So I hope that would never happen in this country.
Mr. Johnson.
Well, I have to say, I think that relations between the UK, I've said what I've said about the relations between the UK and the US are incredibly important. But if you're the leader of a great multiracial, multicultural society, you simply cannot use that kind of language about sending people back to where they came from. I mean, that went out decades and decades ago, and thank heavens for that. So it's totally unacceptable. I agree with the Prime Minister. Not for the first time, I mean.
Was it a racist remark by President Trump?
I've said what I said. I think it was totally unacceptable in a modern, multiracial country which you're trying to lead. I simply can't understand how a leader of that country could come to say that.
Why wouldn't you condemn it as racist then?
Well, you can take from what I've said what I think about President Trump's words.
Mr. Hunt, was it racist, Mark?
I think that, look, I'm Foreign Secretary. This is the President of the country which happens to be our closest ally. And so it is not going to help the situation to use that kind of language about the President of the United States. I can understand how many people in this country would want politicians like me to use those words and would feel that sentiment. But I will make absolutely clear, I hope I have made absolutely clear how totally offensive it is to me that people are still saying that kind of thing.
Thank you. Finally, on this point, quickly before we go to the break, if President Trump, your Prime Minister, President Trump says to you, look, I need to go to war with Iran now because I need to stop them from making a nuclear arsenal, and that is the only way to do it, would you be with them, Mr. Johnson?
I have to say that I don't think I would. I'm going to be very candid with you all tonight. If you say that going to war with Iran now represents a sensible option for us in the West, I just don't believe it is. I think the way forward, I think it's very, very sad to see what's happening, the potential breakdown of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, but diplomacy must be the best way forward. The Iranians have a real incentive to engage with the West, to derive economic benefits from the West in return for not developing their nuclear program. Let's get back on the diplomatic path. And I must say I rather agreed with the letter that the UK and other European Union countries sent today to try to encourage a return to diplomacy. I'm not going to pretend that the mullahs of Tehran are, easy people to deal with, or that they're anything other than a disruptive, dangerous, difficult regime. They certainly are. But I'm not convinced. If you ask me whether I think we should now, were I to be Prime Minister now, would I be supporting military action against Iran? Then the answer is no.
Mr. Hunt, the President rings you, says, I need your help. We're going to take out their enriching uranium plants and their stocks.
Now, I'm on exactly the same page as Boris on this one. I don't think, from numerous conversations that I've had with both the President and his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who Boris also knows very well, I don't think they are looking for any kind of war. And by the way, I don't think the Iranians
So we're 50 minutes away from a missile strike.
Yes, but I don't think they are looking to do any kind of war. I really don't. The risk we have is something different, which is an accidental war, because something happens in a very tense and volatile situation. People misunderstand the other one's motives. And so what we are working to do at the moment is to try and de-escalate as many of the tensions as we possibly can, because this is the one part of the world where if things go wrong, they can go wrong in a very big and bad way, and that's why we've absolutely got to be on our watch.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. That's the end of the first half of the final showdown. After this short 2-minute break, we'll be back with more questions for Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt about domestic policy and also themselves.
Listening to that final showdown, Jeremy Hunt and Boris Johnson in the battle for number 10 with myself, Ian Collins. Talk Radio's political editor, Ross Kemsell, is here. Salient points: Boris unequivocal that Brexit could be delivered, wouldn't explain how we might pay for a no deal. Jeremy Hunt says he can solve the Irish border problem, wouldn't explain quite how or when that might happen. Both ruling out a general election, both insisting they can deal with the USA despite their comments on Donald Trump's words today. And a nice side dish, Ross, Jeremy offered Boris a place in the cabinet.
Huge news lines out of this debate so far, Ian, and we're only halfway through it. The top news line, really, I think for me, is that both Jeremy Hunt and Boris Johnson have basically called the backstop completely dead. Now, they've been campaigning, both of them, on that basis to some extent, but both ruled out tonight any kind of 5-year time limit, any kind of unilateral exit mechanism. That is significant because it was always thought that that might be a backup element in Boris Johnson's arsenal should he get to October. Likewise, in the Talk Radio interview we did with him a little bit earlier, he made similar steps towards it, but that's categorical from Mr. Hunt as well. And likewise, ruling out a general election, both candidates before 2022. Mr. Johnson said there would be an election at some point in 2022, but that's big to rule out a general election before Brexit.
But we still didn't get, even from Boris Johnson, there wasn't that sense, watching and listening to that it is a done deal that October the 31st we leave. We didn't sense that is absolutely 100% from Boris Johnson?
I mean, it was a fiery start to the debate. I think both candidates went in studs up at times. Both were trying to comment on each other's personal records and history. Big difference on immigration numbers. Jeremy Hunt said he would bring them down. Boris Johnson didn't. And that last exchange on racism was absolutely fascinating from both.
Let's move to part two. It is the final showdown live on Talk Radio. Boris Johnson and...
Live from the News UK building in London, this is the final showdown. Jeremy Hunt versus Boris Johnson. Brought to you by The Sun and Talk Radio.
Acrimonious for the last
Oh, this is much nicer.
Welcome back to London Bridge, where tonight Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt are engaged in their last head-to-head debate for the Tory leadership contest, the final showdown. Before one of them becomes Prime Minister next week, we are live on the Sun website and Talk Radio. In the first half, we talked about Brexit a lot. We're now turning to policy at home, as well as the character of the two candidates themselves. Sam Barker has the next question. Sam is a Sun reader and Conservative voter.
So a huge part of your job is to bring back the nation together. So what would you do to change the view of MPs being no more than self-serving posh boys?
Oh, self-serving posh boys.
Boris Johnson.
Well, I think that the number one thing that we've got to do to bring the nation back together, whatever background we may come from, is to show that we're serving the people and not ourselves by getting Brexit over the line. That's what we should be doing. The people voted for this thing 3 years ago. We asked them whether they wanted, we asked them their opinion. They gave it. A pretty substantial majority, considering all the forces that were arguing the other way. It was amazing that 17.4 million voted to leave. And for 3 years, politicians, posh, self-serving or otherwise, have sat around in Westminster basically dithering and dickering around and not getting it done. And I think the best thing we can do now is push Brexit over the line, get it done, and then launch a vision of conservatism that is all about bringing the country together and showing actually that if we, the reason we back wealth creators, and the reason we back business, the reason we back enterprise is not just because those are good things in themselves, though they are, but because that's the way to pay for fantastic infrastructure and a great NHS and everything else that we need. And that is what our modern conservatism is all about. It's a brilliant symmetry. And there's one guy who doesn't understand it, of course, and that is Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. And they are the real threat to our country.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt.
Sam, posh boys. Yeah, as a Charterhouse boy, I'm never going to criticise Boris for going to Eton. That would be totally wrong. And I say this, I think we have, in the Conservative Party, not done enough to show that we have the broad background of people in our party that represents the country we want to serve. And absolutely Boris is right to talk about Brexit. But actually one of the problems is that they don't hear Conservatives talking enough about other issues that worry ordinary families. Issues like the cost of living, the difficulty of getting onto the housing ladder, the fact that rent is extremely expensive if you haven't been able to get onto the housing ladder, and also public services like our schools, our NHS, under a lot of pressure in recent years. So the way that we communicate that vision, I think, is both by broadening the talents of the MPs in Parliament and showing people that we are a party really of all the talents of people of all backgrounds, but also by focusing on issues that don't just matter in the Westminster bubble.
Thank you. Mr. Hunt, you just said you went to Charterhouse, you just said Boris went to Eton, you both went to
I have a
Oxford.
scholarship, by the way.
Well,
I did too.
In fact, interestingly, Mr. Johnson, you referred to Opperden Britain in an interview with The Spectator last week. What does that mean?
Well, if you look at, there's a fascinating thing about what's happening in this country.
And what does Opperden mean?
It means of a town. So if you look at what's happening in this country, the city, London, is doing unbelievably well. It's still, in spite of the depredations of the current mayor, who isn't as nearly as good as the last guy, in my view. London is doing well. The great cities, the core cities of the UK.
I agree with you, Boris.
Yeah, well, no, but we've been in glutinous harmony for too much of this programme. So
you really have. So I'm going to stop.
The core cities are doing well, but there are about 500 towns in the UK. that don't necessarily get the support and investment that they need. They don't get full fibre broadband that they need. They don't have proper funding for their education and other services. And that's what we want to do. We want to lift up the whole country. The mission for the Conservatives in post-Brexit Britain is not only to take advantage of Brexit and to be much more positive about our country and about what it can achieve, but also to unite the country, to bring Britain together with better infrastructure, with better education, and with technology such as full fibre broadband. That is the agenda, and that will transform the lives of people in towns across this country who basically feel left behind, and that was one of the messages of Brexit.
Questions about diversity. Diversity issues really haven't come at all in this issue contest. LGBT rights either. Why is that? Are the Conservative Party members not interested in it? Mr. Hunt.
Well, they came up in the very first hustings we had in Birmingham when we were asked about LGBT issues in Birmingham schools. But as you've asked the question, let me say that I think one of the things that I am most proud of in the last 8 years is that it was a Conservative government that legalised gay marriage. And I think that is a very, very big step forward for our country.
Mr. Johnson?
Well, I totally, I mustn't agree too much with Jeremy, but I think that
Have you voted yet?
I think he is too late for that, Jeremy. But look, this is one of the things where I think the Conservatives can be very proud of our record. We did legalise equal marriage. I was very proud that when I was mayor. I think I walked the whole Pride March with a pink Stetson. And the first thing I ever did when I became Foreign Secretary, literally the first thing I did was to change the rule so that embassies around the world could fly the Pride flag. Because for some reason it had been decided that it would be provocative in some countries. And I said, absolutely not. We stand for our values. And our values, I think, are the right values. They're the inclusive and tolerant values.
So when you wrote in a column in 1998 about tank-topped bumboys in the Ministry of Sound, you're going to apologise for that now.
Look, I think if you're going to excavate and disinter,
just a simple whether you were right or wrong to have done it.
Single quotation from the millions of words I have written. You can of course try and twist things one way or the other, but I have a very, very long and proud record. Let me do. I think when I first came into Parliament, there was a rebellion on the issue of equal marriage, and there were only three members of the Conservative Party who actually supported equal marriage, and they were me and David Cameron and George Osborne. So I've been at it for a very long time. I totally believe in it. It's the right way forward for our country and for our party.
Thank you. What about women? Mr.
Sorry.
Would you give a woman one of the top 4 great officers of state? You know those jobs. Chancellor, Foreign Secretary, Defence Secretary.
I'd give a woman any job, or all the jobs if the right people were there. But absolutely.
I should say, will you?
Will I? Well, I haven't had a discussion with Boris about which role he might do amongst those 4 jobs, and
I'm not going to help you with your gender quota, much as it might think
So that's
you've got such liberal views on gay marriage. We've now heard that you would absolutely fit in very well. So. Look, of course, I think we need to get much more gender balance in the government.
Of course you will give a woman the top 4 job?
Absolutely.
Boris Johnson.
I think I had to answer this question the other night, and I can't remember what. I came up with some very, very clever formula. I can't remember what it was. I will make sure. When I ran City Hall, it was more or less half and half. Men and women at the top of my administration. I believe profoundly in equality, obviously, but I also think that women can make a fantastic difference to the quality of
So top 4 job, yes or no?
Top 4 job, I think I'm going to say yes. Depending on what you mean by top 4, obviously, but in which ones, but yes, I think so. Yes.
Treasury, Foreign Office, Defence.
Well, there you go. I've chucked it out there. You make of it what you will.
Thank you. Okay, I'm sure we will. Let's go to the next question.
That doesn't come under the category of measuring up the curtains. I'm not being complacent about it.
Okay.
I'm just saying that if in an ideal world, were I to be in that situation, then I would.
Thank you. Our next question comes to us from Stefan Hopewell, who is a Sun reader and Conservative voter.
Hi both. I was just wondering, how important do you think charisma is in the role of Prime Minister?
Jeremy Hunt.
I think it is very important. The question is, what is charisma? And charisma is optimism, but it is optimism based on the confidence of being someone who has a plan, who can deliver those plans and can lead people so that they come behind you and help you execute those plans. Charisma is also telling people sometimes things they don't want to hear. That actually, for me, is the true definition of leadership. It's actually being prepared to explain to people sometimes difficult truths, which, as Prime Minister, you have to do regularly. So when I was Health Secretary, for example, I took a number of very difficult decisions. But at the end of my time, 3 million more patients were using good or outstanding hospitals, and I was very proud that I took those decisions. So I think charisma matters, but part of that has to be actual solid delivery, because the British people are not fools. They know a Prime Minister who promises and then doesn't deliver, and that's not charisma, that is trickery.
You accused, Ms. Hunt, you accused Boris Johnson of peddling optimism with his charisma in the last debate. Was that a compliment or an insult?
Well, I think optimism is one of Boris's great qualities. I really do. And I actually, one thing he said in that debate was that we need more optimism in British politics, and I agree with that. But I think optimism has to be credible. It has to be based on promising things that you really can make happen. Otherwise, you just end up with disappointment further down the track. So I think it's about the right type of optimism, the right type of charisma. And if you do that in this country, the sky's the limit.
Yeah.
Mr. Johnson?
Well, I agree very much with that. I think the crucial thing is perhaps not so much charisma as a determination to do the things that you say that you're going to do and a belief in it. And I think the problem we've had over the last 3 years is that the British people have been told that they can't really do something that they've told the politicians they want to do. And I think people are getting thoroughly disheartened and fed up. And what is now needed is some determination actually to get this thing done and get it over the line. I just, since we're looking at people's ability to deliver things, I just remind you, when I used to run the great city that we're now in, we massively reduced, for instance, the numbers of young people who are dying from knife violence, and which was a huge problem when I came in. We cut the murder rate by about 50%. We outbuilt Labour enormously when it came to the provision of affordable homes. We had a huge increase in capacity of our tube. We cut delays by 30%. And if you look at what we did at the Foreign Office, where there was a very tough challenge that we were set to. You remember, Jeremy, by the government. We had to expel some Russia, encourage other countries to join the UK in expelling Russian spies in support of the UK after the poisonings in Salisbury. And we thought we'd be lucky to get a handful of spies expelled around the world. In the end, we got 28 countries to expel 153 Russian diplomats. And when you consider the penalties, the reprisals those countries would face from Putin for daring to do that, that was quite a diplomatic achievement. And
okay.
I just venture to say that when I'm asked to do something, I generally over-deliver in a good way.
Mr. Hunt, you've been accused by some of trying to boost your own charisma by bringing your wife out with you on the campaign trail. Not by me, by some. How do you plead? Is that unfair?
I plead guilty. She's massively more charismatic than me. She's an amazing woman. I'm very lucky to have her. Thank you.
Thank you. You know what's coming now, Mr. Johnson. We've seen a lot of Mrs. Hunt. We haven't seen a lot of your partner with you. How much do the British voters have a right to know about a politician's private life when they're about to be Prime Minister and represent us on the biggest stage in the land?
Yeah. Well, I was going to echo very much what Jeremy had to say about his own wife. But on my own life, look, and my family and my loved ones, I took a decision ages ago, long before I think I even became Mayor of London, which was I just don't talk about people I love, because in the end, if you drag them into the public debate, they can't answer for themselves, they can't speak for themselves, and you drag them into subjects and areas of controversy and discussion that they don't, in my view, necessarily deserve or want. So I've had a pretty ruthless rule of not commenting on that side of things. I don't intend, if I may, to break it after
that's understandable,
30,
but
30 years or whatever it is.
It's a trust thing, isn't it? The more we know about you, the more we can appreciate what you're doing and trust in what you're doing. We don't even know who you're going to be living in Downing Street with. Can you tell us?
Well, you know, again, I don't want to get into any kind of presumptuous, theorising about living in Downing Street at all.
I can answer that question. He'll be living with me. He'll be at number 11 and I'll be at number 10.
Very good. Mr. Johnson, you were
hang on a minute. Did I get that right? Am I being offered the post of Chancellor in Germany?
You're obfuscating.
I think that is the closest you've come to an inducement to collaborate so far in this campaign. It's breaking out into outrageous harmony.
Right. You're also.
It's got to end.
For the record, you didn't answer the question, and you know that, don't you?
I did answer the question in the sense that I declined to comment, as I have done for 30 years or whatever on my private life and so on. There you go. That's as much as you're going to get out of me tonight, Dom. You can keep going, but that's it.
Okay, thank you.
And I also think what the people of this country want to hear, frankly, in the very brief time that they've got is, what are we going to do to stimulate enterprise? What are our plans for helping people with the NHS? What are we going to do to improve education in this country? What are our ideas to take the UK forward? And we've got a fantastic programme, as I say, boosting education, putting another 20,000 police officers out on the streets thank you for that small ripple of applause.
Very good, thank you very much.
Which I think
Mr.
people
Johnson,
want to
thank
hear.
you.
And I may say so, fighting crime with another 20,000 police officers is of more direct relevance or interest to the
we're going to go to the next question.
Country.
Simon Schneider would like to ask.
I may or may not live in Downing Street.
Thank you. Thank you. Simon Schneider is going to ask the next question. And Simon is a Sun reader. He's also a Labour voter. Simon.
Right. Good evening. Obviously, not all Sun readers are Conservative voters. I'd like to ask you, what's the changes to the tax system you would make that would help the people who are worse off in this country?
Well,
you heard that?
I did, yes.
The one change you'll make to the tax system to help the worst off in the country.
I think there's a number of things that you can do, but one of the most obvious is to lift the thresholds, for instance, of national insurance for those on low pay. But I would also mention the living wage, which I believe absolutely passionately, and which I think is just and fair and engenders much greater loyalty, productivity. It's a fantastic thing for companies to do, and we hugely expanded it here in London when I was mayor, and I was delighted to say that policy was then nicked by George Osborne and turned into a national Conservative policy, and quite right, and it's put millions of pounds into the pockets of some of the poorest families in this country, and that is the way forward. But the best way to help the poorest and the neediest in society is to continue to support wealth creation of all kinds. I just point out that when I began
about a tax change.
Well, so for instance, cutting taxes such as corporation tax to drive economic growth. If you look at what happened in London when I was running the city, actually, we began with 4 of the 6 poorest boroughs anywhere in the UK. We ended with none of the poorest 20 after 2 terms, and that was because the whole city had got richer, but it was the bottom quartile, the poorest 25%, who had seen the greatest increase in their prosperity and in their life expectancy. So that is what, we should be, as Conservatives, we should be making that moral case for supporting enterprise, for supporting markets, for supporting a free market system, because that is the way you pay for the poorest and the neediest. And ultimately, there will be no money for the NHS unless we also have a strong and dynamic economy.
Thank you. Mr. Hunt.
Simon, we don't have in the national kitty as much money as I would like to cut taxes for people on low incomes as much as I would want to right now. But let me tell you what I believe we should do as soon as we can afford it. I'm very proud that we raised the threshold at which you pay income tax to £12,500. It was a very expensive reform. It's taken us 8-9 years to get there, but I think it's made a huge difference. But I would like to do that for national insurance as well, because I think everyone in this country should be able to earn £1,000 every month without paying any tax or any national insurance, because I think the cost of living is such that is the least we can do for people. So when we manage to grow the economy, when we get next in the business of making significant tax cuts, my commitment to you is I will do that before I do any tax cuts for people on higher incomes, because I think that is the most important tax cut we can offer.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. There's been a lot of controversy about your plan to raise the high rate of income tax from 50 grand to 80 grand for the most well-off. Can I just confirm, is that still a hard policy?
Yeah, well, I do think it's a bit odd that there's been so much controversy, as you say, Tom. When you consider that there are police inspectors, there are senior nurses, there are heads of maths department who are now being captured, paying the higher rate of tax. And I'm one of those who believes that basically people should, wherever possible, be able to spend their own money as much as they can without the depredations of the tax man.
So it's still a policy, is it?
So I do think it is reasonable for us to look at ways of taking those middle income earners, great public servants, out of the higher rate of tax. And if that isn't a debate that Conservatives can have, then goodness knows, why on earth? That is a very, very important thing that we should be doing. And by the way, the distinction that I would draw.
So it's a debate, not a policy.
I think we should be lifting people on middle incomes out of the higher rate of tax. And by the way, the rate that we have defined is exactly the same one as the Labour Party assigns to working households. And I would point, and the distinction to be made is with our approach, which is to have a high wage, low tax economy for all, and Jeremy Corbyn's approach, which is to tax inheritance, pensions, corporation tax, income, you name it. He put a corporation tax up to the highest level in Europe. He put income tax up to 50p in the pound. He taxed gardens.
We're not debating Mr. Corbyn, he's not here.
No, it's very important because that is the threat that we face. He taxed houses and gardens. And I pointed out to the people of Sevenoaks the other day, they'd have to change their name to Three Oaks as a result of what Corbyn would do. There is a clear choice before this country. It's whether you believe in the symmetry of modern conservatism, supporting a strong dynamic market economy and fantastic public services, or whether you believe in the old Labour tax and spend, which was discredited 30
Allow
years.
Mr. Hunt to come back.
I would love the idea of reducing taxes for everyone. I can remember when Geoffrey Howe reduced the top rate of tax from 98% to, I think it was 63%, and Nigel Lawson then brought it down to 40%. It had a very galvanising effect on the economy, and Conservatives should want to reduce the tax burden on everyone. But I think we also have to be careful about the message that we send out to the country about our priorities. I'm thinking of Sam's question about the posh boys and what are you going to do for ordinary people, and I think it's very important that we don't inadvertently play into the message that Jeremy Corbyn so wants to project about our party. He wants to say you're the party of the rich, you just look after yourself, you're the party of London and the South East. We have to show that we are the party of everyone. So I think we have to be very careful how we do those kinds of tax cuts.
Mr. Hunt, Amber Rudd yesterday, the Work and Pension Secretary, asked both of you, in fact, to end the 4-year-long now freeze on working age benefits, uprate it with inflation next year, which benefits the average recipient of £200. Will you?
I'm certainly look at that very sympathetically. I don't want to make policy on the hoof. Amber makes a very, very powerful case. She has persuaded me that we do need to end the 5-week wait before people can claim universal credit, which I think is the right reform, but I think had unintended consequences when people had that wait early on. So she is someone who cares passionately about social justice. So I think if she recommended it, I would look at it very sympathetically.
Mr. Johnson?
Well, it looks like I've got a great respect for what Amber is doing at DWP, trying to tackle the issues around universal credit, making sure people get paid early enough. But when it comes to the 4-year freeze, I think I probably made enough spending commitments in the last week for the time being. I think what I'm going to do is
$1.5 billion, not that much.
Thank you. I'm going to have a look at it and see what we can do to help. But I don't want, if I may, I'm just going to, rather like Jeremy, I think I'm going to avoid making a policy right now. Exciting and interesting though it might be to do so. I think Amber makes a good point, but we'll look at it.
Would you like the job in DWP, Boris?
Well, I wouldn't want to displace Amber. I think she's, you know, and I'm not certain that she would. I think she'd be rather alarmed to hear you say that.
So it sounds like
Jeremy offering her job at this late hour. I thought she was on your team.
She is
terrible.
a very valued member of it.
It does also sound like
you just offered me her job. I don't wish that. Amber may very well be listening to this debate.
It does sound like Amber Rudd's going to be on your team, though, Mr. Johnson. After watching, Amber Rudd will be on your team now. She's said enough about no deal to get a job in your cabinet.
Well, look, I think both Jeremy and I are fans of Amber. I note that she has said something, progressive about the importance of keeping no deal in our armoury as we go forward towards Brexit on October the 31st, and that's great. And I think that, I think genuinely what is starting to happen in our party is that optimism and common sense are starting to break out.
Okay.
And people can see that actually we've got to get this thing done, and we can get it done.
Next question. Amara Garcia, I probably horrendously mispronounced that one as well. Conservative Party member. Please fire away.
Hi guys. So housing is ridiculously expensive, and for young people like myself, owning property seems next to impossible, let alone being able to afford rent. What are your plans for solving this looming and extremely important issue? Thank you.
Let me go first. Just I can still remember when I bought my first flat when I think I was 29, in Barons Court, West London. It's a great moment, but I actually found some statistics that showed that since then, that was 30 years ago, or nearly 30 years ago, the incomes of people in their 20s has gone up by about 20%. House prices have gone up by nearly 3 times. It has become massively harder for your generation to buy a house than for ours. Now, Margaret Thatcher had a brilliant policy called Right to Buy, where she helped 1.5 million council house tenants get on the housing ladder. She made a lot of them into Conservatives in the process because they became part of our national dream, and we are a property-owning democracy. So I've got a plan called Right to Own that will help 1.5 million young people get on the housing ladder by giving them land that has planning permission, so that all they have to finance from the cost of the mortgage is the cost of actually building it, which is usually, certainly in somewhere like London, a lot less expensive than the cost of the land. So that's what I would do.
Mr. Johnson.
Well, I think that one of the reasons that young people feel so alienated from our party and indeed from the Labour Party is that people aren't offering enough hope for the homes that they need. And if you look at France and Germany, they now have higher levels of owner occupation for under 40s than we do in the UK. What we must do is build much more good quality homes for part-by-part rent, so that young people at least have the possibility of having a share in the equity of their home, even if they can't yet get a mortgage on the whole thing. And there are all sorts of ways that you can help them, including the scheme that Jeremy has just outlined. And for people who are anxious about building the hundreds of thousands, millions more homes, I know that people worry about this. They think it's all going to happen near them on the green belt. You don't have to do it. You don't have to destroy beautiful parts of the countryside to build the homes we need. You can do it if you put in, as I said earlier on, fantastic public infrastructure, above all transport infrastructure. And you look at Crossrail 2, which the current Mayor of London has inexplicably abandoned. Brilliant plan. It would allow you to build 200,000 homes on brownfield sites in the Lower Lee Valley. You get good transport infrastructure done and you liberate brownfield sites and help young people get on the housing market. That's what we should do.
Your policy chief, Liz Truss, thinks you do need to build on the Greenbelt. A whole load of different people think you need to build on the Greenbelt. Not building on the Greenbelt is purely a plan to appease Tory NIMBY members, surely.
Look, I used to be the senior planning authority in the greatest city on earth, and I didn't, which has a huge amount of Greenbelt in it, as you know. And time again, people would come before me and say, look, we've got to do this. This is just a bit of scrubby old Budlear-infested wasteland. We can build here. You won't feel a thing. And I would say no, because the green belt must be protected. And once you start eating away at it, you start to lose the rural feel of so many parts of the country. But you can build on brownfield sites. And look at what we did. We outbuilt Labour by miles. We built far more homes, both affordable homes and for market sale and for rent. And we did it by putting in sensible transport infrastructure of all kinds. That's what you need to do.
Mr. Hunt, the Greenbelt.
I agree with Boris that Greenbelt is one of the best things about this country. That if you look, actually, not just the Greenbelt, but access to green spaces. If you go over London in an aeroplane, you can see so many parks and open spaces compared to other cities. And actually, in most of our country, people have access to green spaces in a way that other countries can only dream of. And I think the great danger of losing that is that you lose it forever, because you can never go back once you build on these green spaces. But there is a trade-off. If you are going to protect those green spaces, you also then have to accept that in our cities and towns, we're going to need to make it easier for people to build up, not out. And actually, I think London is an example where you can do that if you have the right approach. You can have some skyscrapers, it doesn't have to be all skyscrapers, but you can do the planning in a sensible way that means that buildings look beautiful and attractive, but do end up going a little bit higher than might have happened in the past. And that is the trade-off that I think we have to make.
Okay, one final quick point on this. Do you both recommit to the government's current target of building 300,000 net new homes a year, by the way, which this government has failed to meet in a single year? Boris Johnson.
Well, I mean, the biggest, I think, we had 68, we did 478,000 homes in this country. That's the record in my lifetime. We've got nowhere near it, as you know, Tom. I mean, maximum 200,000 a year. The run rate is far too low, but I'm not going to commit to a particular number now, except to say we've got to increase it. But we've got to build the right sort of homes in the right place. That's the most important thing. And I think what Jeremy had to say just now about density over transport hubs and that sort of thing is very, very sensible. That's what we should be doing.
Mr. Hunt, quickly, 300,000 target, will you stay with it?
Look, it's not an easy target, but I will stay with it, because I think we need to send a signal to young people that we recognise that more houses need to be built, but we've got to do a lot of work to make sure we actually deliver it.
Thank you very much. You'll be sorry to hear that is the end of our audience questions. Time is running out fast, I'm afraid. Thank you to everyone who asked one. However, so many questions were submitted by our excellent readers and Talk Radio listeners that we have time, a few minutes anyway, for a round of short-fire questions asked by me. Gentlemen, the only rule on this one is a yes or no answer, please.
Yes or no?
Yes or no.
Can you...
Why don't we start with you, Mr. Johnson? Will you stick to Theresa May's target to cut climate change emissions to zero by 2050?
Yes.
Yes.
That's quick. Thank you for sticking to yes or no. Mr. Hunt, is Jeremy Corbyn personally anti-Semitic?
Unfortunately, he may be.
Okay. Mr. Johnson?
I think by condoning anti-Semitism the way he does, I'm afraid he's effectively culpable of that vice. Yes.
Mr. Johnson, will you continue to freeze fuel duty like the Conservative government and the coalition government before it did for the last 8 years?
I'm not making any more spending commitments tonight, but I'd love to.
That's a no.
It's not a no. It's yes or no. You've asked us to give a yes or no. Look, I'm not.
Which one is it then?
I'm not making any more blooming promises. You know.
Right.
Okay,
Mr. Hunt.
I agree with Boris.
I want to. I'd love to. And by the way, once we leave the EU, we'll be able to cut VAT.
Okay.
How about that? And excise.
Mr. Hunt, when was the last time you cried?
Ooh. Yes or
kind
no?
of yes or no.
Well, my daughter had a graduation ceremony this afternoon, but that actually wasn't the moment. The last time I cried was actually, this isn't yes, no, that's not a yes-no question.
Fine,
How can you possibly, that's a trick question, refusing to answer.
You don't want to answer it?
I'm only answering yes-no questions.
You don't want to answer it?
Oh, well, you said you were going to ask us a yes-no question, so refusal.
Mr. Johnson?
I think the last time I shed a tear was when I came out of I came out of Parliament to find that my bike had been nicked. I want you to know that this was very recently. And I had my bike for the whole of my mayoral career. It was a beautiful bike. It was given to me by Chris Boardman, the fantastic cyclist. It was a beautiful Boardman bike. It wasn't the most expensive Boardman bike, but it was a beautiful Boardman bike. And it was never nicked during all my time as mayor. I used to chain it up across the whole city, cycled everywhere, and barely had Sadiq Khan's reign begun.
Okay.
Did you actually cry?
I think I became mildly lachrymose. I'll put it that way.
Right.
I mean, I did, yeah. Because
no,
it was
I definitely don't know what that means.
You just feel the sense of anybody who has something that they love stolen feels a sense of outrage and injustice.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons, by the way, we should have another 20,000 police on the street.
Okay.
Ms.
Johnson, here is a yes or no. Will you give England Cricket World Cup hero Ben Stokes a knighthood?
Dukedoms.
Dukedom.
I will give we will go to the maximum of what the Garter King of Arms.
You're writing the next honours list. Is he going to get a knighthood?
Say again?
You'll write the next honours list. You're submitting to the Queen.
Write the next honours list.
Exactly.
He may.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Does he deserve a knighthood?
Well, so yes, is the answer. Absolutely.
Yes. Mr. Hunt.
Of course.
Good. That was easy. Mr. Johnson, a question only for you now. Will you keep Mr. Hunt as Foreign Secretary?
I think that would come under the general category of an impertinent commentary on the future composition of a cabinet I was lucky enough to lead. But what I can tell you is I have the highest regard for Jeremy Hunt.
Mr. Hunt, would you give Boris Johnson his old job back as Foreign Secretary?
Look, Boris, you've got nothing to worry about. You will have a very, very senior role.
Well, you've given me Amber's job. You've given me Amber's job already. I mean,
yes, it might be that. Who knows?
Has Amber been on to the team at the back, by the way, to find out what's going on? Because I think there's the mutiny and dissension is going to be breaking out fairly soon.
Well, it is, but you won't give each other jobs. You'll both be in each other's cabinet, yes or no? Quickly.
Yes.
I think yes or no is the answer. Look, I think it's impertinent to.
You won't have Mr. Hunt in your cabinet.
I won't announce any. I really don't think it'd be right before the conclusion of this campaign to announce any jobs. The one way to survive these things is not to promise jobs to anybody.
Okay.
But you've heard what I said about my high esteem for Jeremy. You heard that, didn't you?
Final question. Will you both go for a pint with each other once this is all over? Mr. Hunt.
Several, I think.
Not tonight, the leadership contest, Mr. Hunt.
For sure.
Mr. Johnson?
Absolutely, yes.
There was actually one more that I forgot. I'm so sorry. This really is the last yes or no. Actually, sorry, it's not even a yes or no. Who do you want to win Love Island?
I don't know. I don't watch it. I'm sorry.
Wait.
Mr. Johnson?
God, no, the thing is, I have been watching it very, very dimly over. It all seems to involve these people with very few clothes on in a. What's going?
You're not interested in that, are you, Boris?
I'm not interested in it. I can't remember. What's the right answer to this, Tom? Who?
I can't decide for you.
Amber. Amber's in Love Island.
Okay.
Let's both vote for Amber.
Okay. Amber Rudd to win Love Island. Thanks. That's a lovely way to end. Okay, thank you very much. That really is time up now. Very, very quickly, we're going to end the debate with a closing statement now from each of the two candidates. Mr. Hunt, your closing statement, please.
Well, we've had a good debate this evening, and I think there has been some excitement about the great potential of our amazing country. I think we can do better. I am someone who comes from a business background. I want to fire up our economy. I want to transform our education system. I want to tackle our housing problems. And I want us to walk tall in the world by investing in our armed forces. I'm someone who has the experience, the grasp of the difficult issues to actually deliver on these promises. But whatever happens, I pledge to unite our party and unite our country. Because after this leadership campaign, we need to come together, and I'll make sure that happens.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, your closing statement.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming on tonight. I think there's only one way to restore our national trust in politics, and that, as I say, is to get Brexit done by October the 31st. But that is only a prelude to getting on with all the fantastic things that we need to do. Better infrastructure, better education, fighting crime, and ending what I may call the defeatism that I'm afraid seems to have engulfed so many of us with a new can-do spirit of modern conservatism. And I think that I have the energy and the credentials to do the job. I think this is an absolutely incredible country, and we haven't believed in ourselves enough over the last few years. And I think we've had enough dither and delay. We need now to get on with it and to believe in Britain. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed for coming. We appreciate it. And thank you also to our audience here tonight, those watching on the sun.co.uk, those listening on Talk Radio, and everyone who was also watching our social channels and sent in questions and ideas. Stay tuned to Talk Radio now for instant analysis of tonight's debate with Ross Kempsell and a host of guests, and of course see all the reaction on the sun.co.uk and in our paper tomorrow morning. By next week, one of these two men standing here will be your next Prime Minister. I hope you now know a little bit more about them and what they will do with that immense power. From me, thank you very much and good night.
Slyly and subtle ways for their backgrounds, for their personal records in government as well. So it was a huge, huge debate. We're going to get into the real analysis of what happened. We're going to hear from MPs who are supporting both of those candidates. But the most important thing is to really to listen to what you think and to hear the views of our Talk Radio listeners.
We'll be speaking to Ian Duncan-Smith. In fact, Mr. Duncan-Smith has just literally, as we speak, hot-footed it from one debate. Good evening to you, sir. Nice to have you with us.
Thanks, yeah.
You are, of course, a Boris man.
Yeah, I'm running his campaign. So
Was there a moment there you thought you might be running the wrong campaign?
No, I haven't been. With Boris, first of all, Boris is a different type of politician. Boris is somebody who genuinely, I think, lifts people. He feeds off people's enthusiasm, and I think if you watch how he's behaved, it's all been about trying to get a new sense of optimism and hope, which actually a lot of people feel out there, away from what I call the Beltway here in Westminster, not here, but certainly in Westminster, where everyone just spends their whole time meandering around in Parliament being depressed about life, whereas actually most people say, let's get on with it, let's do it, let's get it done, and let's make it great.
But it's going to take a bit more than optimism. There's a lot of that kind of bluster. There's a lot of smiles and the sort of characteristic Boris bumbling, which many people like. But it's really detailed, Mr. Duncan-Smith, isn't it? That's
of course it is, yeah. No, all the detailed stuff is being done. The key question, though, is in a leader, what do you want? You want a leader who actually believes that something is doable, believes that they can sell that idea, not just here at home, but also to others, partners that we're going to have to do business with, who's very clear about it, though. This country is a remarkable country, and I'm fed up sitting in Parliament, and so is Boris, in sitting listening to people talk about the UK as though we can't live unless we're locked into the EU. Everybody out there knows very well that the UK will do very well, whatever the circumstances are. We voted to leave, let's get on with it. And I think that's what's necessary.
So Boris Johnson in that debate ruled out a general election before Brexit was delivered. That's really the main Brexit newsline that we got from Mr. Johnson this evening. So did Mr. Hunt, a same commitment from him. Now, if Mr. Johnson runs out of options in September, say the EU don't agree to change the backstop, there's no option on the standstill period, Mr. Johnson doesn't want to break his word, he still wants to get the UK out of the European Union by the 31st of October, but no deal is somehow blocked by Parliament. He's just taken the final option of an election off the table. What is he going to do?
Well, first of all, I don't believe that no deal can be blocked by Parliament now, because what they call no deal, by the way, is not no deal. It'll be a whole lot of mini deals. It's just not the withdrawal agreement. That's what they mean. The reality, though, is Parliament has already voted for that, because Parliament voted Article 50 through. Article 50 has a set end date. Unless the UK asks for and is given and accepts an extension, we have to leave by the 31st of October. So Parliament can decide what they want to do to mess it around, but the reality is the government has to accept, first of all, has to ask for and then accept an extension. What Boris is saying is he's not going to be accepting any extensions because we made a pledge. We leave by the 31st of October. And the quicker some of my colleagues in Parliament get it and understand that this is last chance saloon territory, both the Conservative and the Labour Party have suffered 3 really bad election results. They have been told by the British people they're sick to the back teeth of the rowing and the arguing going on. They want to see it delivered. And it can be delivered. It must be delivered.
So Boris Johnson hinted at an election in 2022. Obviously, there was one scheduled, but he said it could be earlier in that year. How are you going to get any domestic policy done at all when you don't have the numbers in the House of Commons without an election? You're not going to be able to do anything.
Well,
for
not
2
everything.
years.
Not everything that you need to do relies on having major bills to go through. There's a lot that
A
can
lot
go
of the
on.
spending commitments do.
Well, not all of them, no, because it depends where you are. And I've done this for 27 years, and I've seen how this works. You can get quite a lot done without having to have massive legislation. Quite a lot of the time, secretaries of state and departments try and have legislation because they want the limelight. It's not always necessary.
So he's going to govern without the mandate from the House of Commons?
No, it's not without the mandate. The mandate is there at the last election. Unless we lose a vote of confidence, then that mandate remains.
Well, this is huge optimism on your part. You were talking about optimism at the beginning. I mean,
Yeah.
This is optimism off the... This is another stratosphere optimism.
Well, because
isn't it?
I tell you, I've sat in Parliament absolutely sick and tired and really embarrassed about my colleagues and their behaviour in there. We've asked the British people to make a decision. They made a decision. Some of those who didn't like it have never accepted it. My answer is, like it or not, many who have said, let's get on with it.
But the
Let's do it.
divides that you've experienced in the last 2-3 years, everything over Brexit, they are going to be compounded. They're going to be worse. It's going to be difficult to get anything through, any kind of legislative programme, domestic or otherwise. It's going to be near on impossible.
Well, first of all, let's deal with Brexit. I don't think it's like that. I think that on the 29th of March, a lot of things changed. I think attitudes in Parliament changed quite dramatically. People thought that they could mess around on this, and then those 3 elections have really told them what is going to happen to them. First, there was the shockwave of the local elections where both sides did really badly. Then there was what I call the earthquake of the Euros, which told us we are going to get wiped out. And the third one was Peterborough, which if anybody in Parliament didn't get what was happening, Peterborough by-election told them it's dangerous. So now what I notice is in the Labour Party, and the Labour Party I think has taken a turn into oblivion, deciding that they now are going to be the Remain Party. That means all of their Labour MPs who sit in Northern and Midlands and Welsh seats who represent strongly Leave constituencies, they're all furious because they've got nowhere to go. So my point is, many of them, 26 signed up to a letter the other day, said they would not stop Brexit. There's about another 15 at least in Parliament who have decided that they really have to get us out. So this has changed. And you saw a vote the other day in Parliament about 3 weeks ago in which they tried, Labour, to block anything that Boris Johnson was doing by saying we would never allow a no-deal Brexit, as they called it, by the 31st. That was voted down. Why? Because a whole lot of Labour MPs decided either to abstain or vote with us. So I think the mood has shifted significantly, and I think that is a really important feature. Parliament is beginning to wake up.
Let's talk about immigration. Boris Johnson refused to categorically bring down net migration levels. Jeremy Hunt, on the other hand, said that he would make that commitment. Were you surprised by that from Mr. Johnson?
No, because I think what he's saying is too many governments come in and make this kind of open-ended statement. It's now been thoroughly discredited by the public because they saw this commitment that was made by David Cameron.
You're talking about the 100,000 now migration target. Yeah.
I actually believe that the system that we're going to be bringing in will reduce migration. It will reduce it in a way that works for the UK. But the reality is we have to get it in place. So his position is quite clear. I'm not going to make pledges that are plucked out of nowhere that tell the public, believe me because I've told you something. The public right now has decided they don't believe a damn word that we say because we don't deliver on it.
So is it coming down or is it staying the same or is it going up?
I believe overall it will reduce, but it needs the right policies in place. Boris has to get those done. They don't happen immediately. There's stuff that has to be brought through in a parliament. And this means basically that with the right policies, we get the right skills, the right talents in here, but we make sure, when we leave the EU, remember something quite importantly. The big pull of benefit migration starts to go because there is no necessity for us to offer full ranges of benefits to anybody that comes over, including family benefits. So that means, therefore, as a natural disinclination just to come here and sit on very low-paid, appallingly badly paid jobs and then do terrible, abusive cash-in-hand jobs. That will eventually be squeezed out.
So the manager of Boris Johnson's campaign is saying that immigration numbers are going to come down.
No,
Boris Johnson can't make that commitment tonight.
Boris Johnson
What's the
has...
position?
I know, Boris Johnson's exactly the same with me. We're not going to committing to levels of migration reduction which make us look like idiots in front of the public, because the public knows they're not going to believe what we say. What we have to do is deliver the right system that allows us to get the balance right and reduce
So
migration.
why will that system be believed? I mean, you've had, what, 9 years of this promise of tens of thousands. Mr Cameron, Mrs May, both picking up the same mantle. What will be different this time that the public will say, now that Boris, along with Mr Duncan Smith and co, are in power, we can finally believe them?
Well, because when we present the system that we're going to present as
So you know the
new
system
migration
now,
system,
but you're just
I
not
pretty
telling
much do. Yes, most of it's done now, and I've been working on it with a lot of colleagues for some time. What Boris
Has it got the word Australian in it, son?
Well, the point system has already been in place in the UK, and Boris has talked about making it more of an Australian-style point system. Gives you the flexibility to decide what the overall numbers are, but it also means you're able to sort things out in an internal sense. And I came back to the point that said there will no longer be quite that nature of pull coming from the benefit system, which many people have complained about and allowed people to take very, very cheap jobs, often being abused, by the way, often in modern-day slavery, being abused in these gangs that actually work. This kind of stuff you'll want to stamp out. And if you stamp that out, you actually get the people here that really want to work and add value to the country. And that's what Boris wants.
So why didn't he just say he'd bring net migration down?
No, because he's been asked to give a statement specific that they will do this. What he's saying is, we will work a migration system that's fair, and I believe that having seen that will eventually reduce migration. But he's quite right to refuse to give a commitment to reduce it immediately, because this discredited commitment that we've had so far
it could be fair,
has never
but
been reached.
it could in fact increase migration in that respect.
I believe it will probably come down.
Mr Duncan Smith, thank you. With us here on Talk Radio. Let's go to a Jeremy Hunt supporter. Vicky Ford is the Conservative MP for Chelmsford. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
Nice to have you with us. What are you making of your man this evening?
Well, I think it was a really positive performance by Jeremy, and what you saw actually was really interesting watching on the TV, because in the half-time break, a number of members of the audience were coming and surrounding Jeremy and asking him questions, engaging, listening and wanting to hear more. It was a really optimistic performance, and the audience were all around Jeremy Hunt wanting to know more. He's a man with huge detail, huge policy, huge plans, understands the challenges that we face. But what he shows every time he does one of these hustings is that he's got the plan, but he's also got the charm, the charisma, the optimism to resolve it.
But isn't the problem, Vicky Ford, that when it came to, for example, the Irish border question, of course, that came up, he couldn't give any time limits on that. He wasn't able to make those kind of guarantees. He talked loosely about technology. It's somewhere down the line there will be technology to be able to address this. He couldn't be very specific.
So Jeremy is being really, really clear. He is not going to make promises that he cannot keep.
So he's being clear that he can't be clear, essentially.
And there is no majority in the House of Commons for the Conservative Party. That's why Theresa May got into problems when she made those promises she couldn't keep about the end of March, because there isn't a majority. He has made it very clear that there are solutions for resolving the backstop, resolving the issue on how do we keep that open border in Northern Ireland, and he is the person who's going to negotiate that. That's why he has a plan to resolve this impasse, and it's absolutely right. I was born and raised in Northern Ireland. I remember being in a primary school when a bomb went off across the road. I never want to go back to the troubles in Northern Ireland. We have to have the detailed plan and the patience to get this negotiation through. For me, it's all about trust. When we send our next Prime Minister back to Brussels, they're only going to give us a better deal if they trust us to be a good neighbour. And that's what they get with Jeremy.
Vicky, it's Ross Kempsall, the political editor here at Talk Radio. Mr Hunt, for all of that, wasn't able to categorically commit again in the debate, was he, to the 31st of October date? And in fact, Mr Johnson pushed him and said, if it's going to be by Christmas, which Christmas will it be? Do you think that away from the actual policy detail of the debate, this has been a problem for Mr Hunt all the way through this campaign? It's just held him back. If only he'd gone a little bit further.
If there are Conservative Party members listening to this right now, please don't be taken in by somebody making promises they can't keep. It's not in our next Prime Minister's hands to keep at that 31st of October date as such a rigid date. What Jeremy has said very clearly is that by the end of September, if there is no deal, then we will leave with no deal.
Vicky
But
Ford.
if there is a deal, then we must make sure we keep it. And for a matter of a few days, if that's a few weeks, if that's the deal, that means we can resolve this without going back to a generation of troubles in Northern Ireland, then that is worth doing. So absolutely. And then other issues, there were so many other issues that came up tonight. But basically, we've got a man who's got the plan, the policy, the optimism. Let's get it done.
The endorsement has not changed. Vicky Ford, thank you. Nice to have you with us. Conservative MP for Chelmsford with us here on Talk Radio. We'll go to some more guests in a couple of moments' time, more MPs. Some of the people who were there at that husting, who were watching live, we'll talk to them and see what they made of it. 0344 499 1000. It's Ian Collins and Ross Kempsell on Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
The Matthew Wright Show, weekday afternoons from 1 on Talk Radio.
I'm Matthew Wright. Join me this Monday from 1 on Talk Radio. I'll be shaking up your afternoons with 3 hours of original current affairs conversation, unfiltered comment and irreverent opinion.
Putting the world to rights. The Matthew Wright Show, weekday afternoons from 1.
Always look on the right side of life.
On Talk Radio.
The final showdown, Jeremy Hunt versus Boris Johnson on Talk Radio.
Yes, good evening. We managed also to find real-life Labour and Conservative supporters in the building. We have Simon Schneider, who was one of the people to ask a question there this evening. Also, Amara Garcia, have I got that correct? Yeah. Who's a Conservative Party supporter. Amara, firstly, are you a Johnson or a Hunt man? Person.
I'm leaning. So I've already voted. I voted for Boris Johnson, and that's because I think he will be the one to deliver Brexit on time.
All right. Did you? I mean, there's still not been, just on that point, and we keep talking about. There's still not been that sort of unequivocal. Yes, absolutely. October the 31st.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was an interview a couple of weeks ago, exclusive on Talk Radio, where Ross asked Boris that point, and he said, "Do or die." Seems to have reined back on that a little bit. We're not getting the "do or die" lines anymore.
Yeah, I do slightly agree with you. However, I do think Jeremy Hunt is really not focused on getting the best deal for Brexit, even if it is going for no deal. I do think Boris Johnson is the man to do it.
Okay. Simon Schneider, you're a Labour supporter. I mean, firstly, what an experience being in a room, not only with two
I feel a bit stitched up, actually.
two Conservative candidates and probably a good percentage of Conservative voters, for obvious reasons. That would.
No, I mean, I did feel a little bit like a fish out of water, but I think, I mean, as a Labour supporter, and to be perfectly honest, I'm a frightened Labour supporter at the moment. I'm not in favour of everything that's going on in the Labour Party by any stretch of the imagination. But to see two guys tonight, I think it was very interesting. I think, personally, I thought that Jeremy Hunt came across possibly a bit more statesmanlike, and I think if I had a vote, it would have been for him. But Boris always sounds like he's just swallowed a dictionary, doesn't he? I mean, I'm not quite sure if he would be serious enough to take on such a really massive job, to be perfectly honest. But
as a Labour supporter, I want to ask you about two things, Simon. The first is both candidates ruled out a general election before Brexit. So that would mean that Jeremy Corbyn wouldn't have the opportunity, potentially, to be tested in a general election against either of these candidates until 2022. I mean, do you think that's taking him seriously? Yeah.
Well, I'd love Jeremy Corbyn to be replaced as Labour leader, I have to say. I think I'm Jewish, and I'm very worried about the anti-Semitism in the party. And I'm also worried about it leaning far too... I mean, as much as the Conservative Party can lean too far to the right, I think Labour's leaning too far to the left.
But both candidates actually called Jeremy Corbyn personally anti-Semitic in this debate. They didn't use exactly that word, but that was the question, and both candidates gave an affirmative answer. What did you think at that moment when both Tory candidates, both people who might be Prime Minister, believe that the leader of the Labour Party is personally anti-Semitic?
Well, I think they're both right to say that, and I think that it sums up the terrible position Labour find themselves in at the moment, with a leader who, because he prevaricates so much doesn't come out, and nobody is really convinced that he isn't anti-Semitic. I'm not convinced that he isn't anti-Semitic, so you have to draw your own conclusion, don't you?
There's no one here to give Jeremy Corbyn's view, but we should say that he always strongly denies that he is personally anti-Semitic in any way. Overall, what about the quick-fire element where we got to know a little bit about the character of both of these men? I thought that was probably one of the most interesting parts of the debate. What were you thinking all the way through those yes/no questions?
It was interesting to see how both didn't know anything about Love Island.
Reassuring.
Well, was there a bit, Amara, where you thought, hang on, so you've already voted for Boris Johnson. Did you sit there in the audience at any point and go, God, I've got the wrong guy here?
So on certain aspects, I do feel that way. However, I do think Boris Johnson is the man to keep Jeremy Corbyn out, take Brexit Party votes back to the Conservative Party. And I don't think Jeremy Hunt has that. I don't think he has the sort of status amongst the public to do that. I think Boris is the man to deliver Brexit.
Okay, and just one word on this, Simon, because we've got to move on. Dominic Raab is coming in with us in just a second. Did you, was there any point that, even as a Labour voter, you thought I could actually turn and vote for one of these men?
Never.
Simon, thank you. Good to see you. Amara, nice to see you as well. Thank you guys for coming in. It is Talk Radio. It's Ian Collins and Ross Kempsell here. We're digesting. It's the analysis after, of course, the big debate, the final showdown, live here on Talk Radio by a country mile that was the most thorough and certainly, I think, the most honest and the most compelling and interesting debate that we've seen in the 15 hustings, Ross, so far.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, what was really interesting about that debate was the exchange of short yes/no questions at the end, and also the fact that we saw both of the candidates longer together for the first time than throughout this entire competition head-to-head.
Ross will be back with more in a few moments' time. Dominic Raab with us on Talk Radio next.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
Talk Radio. Alistair Stewart in for Julia Hartley-Brewer on Talk Radio. The biggest breaking news stories, headline-grabbing guests, and razor-sharp opinion.
It's Alistair Stewart here. I'll be sitting in this week for Julia Hartley-Brewer, Monday to Thursday. I hope you'll be able to join me for a first look at all of the front pages of the newspapers, lots of business, lots of politics, and a little bit of mirth as well.
Alistair Stewart in for Julia Hartley-Brewer.
Tomorrow morning from 6:30.
On Talk Radio.
The final showdown. Jeremy Hunt versus Boris Johnson on Talk Radio.
We are back. It is Talk Radio. Ian Collins and Ross Kempsell. We're analysing, digesting, picking over that debate that we've just seen. Dominic Raab is with us in the studio, former Brexit secretary, and of course, supporter of Mr. Johnson. Dominic Raab, good evening.
Good evening.
Was there a point there you thought, wow, I could have been there?
Do you know what? I was just thinking about the two candidates in front of me, if I'm honest.
You weren't reliving and at that point thinking that you were still anchoring for that kind of...
I've got over the post-traumatic stress disorder of being a leadership candidate.
You and half a dozen others, of course. So you are not alone in sharing that status. So what did you make of this evening? I mean, we were both saying, and maybe we are biased, but actually that seemed to me to be a very open and very honest and a slightly more natural debate than I think we've seen.
Yeah, I think actually, in fairness, Tom Newton-Dunn and The Sun compared it very well, so it ran smoothly. It felt more like a conversation. Obviously, we've been over a lot of this ground before. I think in terms of the substance, there's all sorts of amusing asides, the substance, the defining difference between them remains this issue of who can be most trusted to get us out of the EU by the end of October. Boris was absolutely categoric about this, and Jeremy again got caught up and snagged a little bit on it. Now, I think that's the defining issue of this contest, and I think, again, it was crystal clear that Boris is the man to deliver.
He's not fully categoric, is he? I mean, it's not absolutely there. It's a yes. It's not, I will resign as Prime Minister if we're not out by October the 31st.
No, it was an absolutely categoric commitment, but no, he hasn't got into.
And it's an aspiration, then, isn't it?
It's an absolute categoric assurance that that's what he's going to do. But I don't see why he should get into the business of saying I'll resign over this or that. I think that's a trick that Jeremy was setting up, and he was wise not to fall into it.
There was a moment really towards the end of that debate, wasn't there, with the discussion of the Kim Darroch issue, where both candidates stepped away from calling President Trump racist. Do you think you would have gone further than Boris Johnson went tonight?
No, but I've thought about it a lot. My father was a refugee to this country. My wife's from Brazil. I've got two what we call Brazilian boys at home. If anyone said that about my kids or my family, a bit like Jeremy with his background, I'd be absolutely appalled. But the other thing was that the question of whether it's racist or not, you need to know a bit more about the families involved with the congresswomen and the context of it. But basically, I thought even before all of that, it was just nonsensical. I mean, the way I look at it in terms of this country, I'm proud of the fact that I'm half Czech, that I've got 2 boys at home who are half Brazilian but also half English, that we watch the World Cup together and we laugh about the teams we support. That is one of the defining features of being British. That's what we're all so proud of. And I would defend that to my dying days.
You don't think that Boris Johnson should have just said, yes, that was racist?
No, I don't think so, actually. I think we got off the... first of all, let's face it, we need to make sure this Conservative leadership contest is focused on the issues facing the British electorate here at home. I don't think we, any more than we want Donald Trump necessarily being dragged into this contest, I think we want to be dragged into US politics. I think he was right to be clear, as Jeremy was, that kind of language is deplorable, without actually a personalised attack of that nature on the president, given that they're both campaigning to be the next Prime Minister.
They are indeed. Of course, Mr Hunt did offer Boris Johnson, what it appears, several jobs during that interview, including Chancellor of the Exchequer, sort of. I mean, is that... could you imagine if you were in that situation where Jeremy Hunt got the big job? How would you settle for Boris in second place as Chancellor?
Sorry, well, I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Do I think Boris would be a good Chancellor, or I think...
would it satisfy you as a Conservative if Mr Hunt were to get the big job and Boris was given the number two status?
I want Boris to be the Prime Minister because I think he's got the conviction and the resolve to get us out of the EU, and that's a precondition to uniting the country behind an optimistic plan for the future.
You'd serve in a Hunt cabinet, though?
I just don't get into the flouncy thing about saying I wouldn't serve under X or Y. Yes, I'd serve under Jeremy. I've said no to jobs before, I'm afraid, so I'm always a bit careful about this. I'm one of these people who've, I'm afraid, declined jobs where I didn't think I'd be very good at them.
But the key thing is that Boris Johnson, we think, on the polling, looks very likely to be walking into number 10 in a week's time. You're expecting that call probably
am I?
Of course, on Wednesday evening, surely. No. So what job is it that you're hoping for?
So my advice, and to all of them, but when I've spoken to Boris, is that there shouldn't be any discussion of that kind of stuff. I wouldn't have as a candidate, and I certainly wouldn't want to, in relation to the other candidates, talk about jobs. First of all, I think it's presumptuous. Second of all, I think it's really important that the next Prime Minister has the fullest latitude to pick the very best team on merit. That's the way these things should be decided.
every MP. I mean, every MP wants to ultimately be Prime Minister, even if they say, no, I don't. They usually do.
I'm not sure they all do.
So you must, when you go to sleep at night, Dominic Raab, you must sit there thinking, do you know what? A cabinet position is just a fortnight away. I'm back with my red box. I'm back with the car. I'm back in the game.
Yeah, no,
it must go through your mind. Come on.
Look, it's very kind
You've
of
been
you
there around the cabinet
to
table.
join
You're
my
seriously
enter
telling
my
me
dreams.
you haven't thought about that. You must have.
Look, I'm as ambitious as the next person in politics, but I also, and I come from a professional background in law, business, and diplomacy. I think it's very important that the team picked is up for this job. And in order for that to be done in the most professional way, Boris must have the prerogative and retain the prerogative to pick the right team to deliver his agenda. It's very important.
Dominic Raab, thank you. Good to
talk
see
to
you.
Cheers.
And we will speak some more in a few moments' time in the next section here on Talk Radio. Lots of guests still to come. We'll be talking to more members of Parliament as well. And, of course, some of those people that were there at that debate this evening, firing in questions to the two contenders for the big job at number 10. We'll take your comments as well, 0344 499 1000. You can text 87222, start your message with the word talk. The time now is just coming up to 9 o'clock. You're listening to Ian Collins and Ross Kempsell on Talk Radio. Let's get the latest news headlines with James Nish.
Thanks, Ian. On the way, final showdown. Brexit dominates. Trump condemned and new promises.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
Talk Radio, on the hour news headlines.
Good evening. Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt have condemned Donald Trump for saying rival politicians from ethnic minorities should go back to their crime-infested countries. But during a debate hosted by The Sun and Talk Radio, they both stopped short of calling the US president a racist.
I simply can't understand how a leader of that country could come to say that.
Why wouldn't you condemn it as racist then?
Well, you can take from what I've said what I think about President Trump's words.
It is not going to help the situation to use that kind of language about the President of the United States.
It was the final head-to-head before one of the men's elected Tory leader and therefore Prime Minister both ruled out a general election before we leave the EU. The evening started with an apology from Jeremy Hunt.
We promised Sun readers, Talk Radio listeners, families up and down this country that we would be out by the end of March, and we betrayed that trust when we failed to do that.
Boris Johnson told the audience Britain needs to be firm with Brussels to get a good deal.
Unless they look into our eyes and see that we are absolutely determined to come out of the EU on October the 31st, come what may.
Former Tory leader Ian Duncan-Smith, who's running Boris Johnson's campaign, has told Talk Radio the country needs a leader who believes things can be done.
This country is a remarkable country, and I'm fed up sitting in Parliament, and so is Boris, in sitting listening to people talk about the UK as though we can't live unless we're locked into the EU. Everybody out there knows very well that the UK will do very well, whatever the circumstances are. We voted to leave, let's get on with it. And I think that's what's necessary.
Talk Radio's political editor Ross Kemsell says there were interesting new commitments from both.
There were elements of the debate that were light-hearted, but there were also elements of the debate that were very serious in policy terms, and we got some new information and some new commitments from both candidates. Both ruled out an election before Brexit until Brexit is delivered. Both candidates ruled out a time limit or an extension to the backstop.
And there'll be further reaction and analysis throughout the night and on breakfast here on Talk Radio.
Talk Radio National Weather.
Largely dry overnight, tomorrow warm and sunny for most. Some showers possible for Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales.
Talk Radio.
The final showdown. Jeremy Hunt versus Boris Johnson on Talk Radio.
It is Talk Radio 0344 499 1000. Ian Collins and Ross Kemsell here. We're just chewing over the debate, probably the most open debate that I think we've seen of all the televised ones. If you look at the hustings as well, I mean, this, Ross, was, I mean, it was incredibly. That word organic often gets overused, but I mean, it did manage to flow very well. I thought we got more out of the two men on this than we had on previous debates.
Reactions really flooding in saying along those lines, Ian. And I think the reason why that happened was because we had the longest period of uninterrupted head-to-head that we've seen in both from both candidates in this debate so far. And we also had a high degree of interaction from both of the candidates, basically trying to rile each other up with a slight tongue-in-cheek moment. There was plenty of banter, you might call it, in that debate. Jeremy Hunt offering Boris Johnson the job of Chancellor, Boris Johnson not going as far to rule in Jeremy Hunt to his cabinet. There were lots of moments where they touched on personal issues. I thought it was a great question when the candidates were asked when was the last time that they cried. Boris Johnson saying it was the last time that he shed a tear was when his bike was stolen outside
his bike,
apparently. And Jeremy Hunt declining to say that he'd cried recently, even though he mentioned that he'd been to his daughter's graduation today. So I thought it was just fascinating insight into them as people as well as politicians.
We have with us a couple of guests in the studio. Emily Hewitson, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are
Good.
you?
You sort of came to a bit of sort of social media prominence because firstly, you're a Conservative.
Yes.
You're not 174 years old. You're 19.
No, I know, it's a shocker. I'm a young Conservative. They do exist. I know.
A lot of your mates are probably thinking, what the heck's going on?
Who is this girl?
My friend's gone weird on us. But the reason I meant you were on Question Time, of course, and you asked a question, you threw out a question, and you made your points very forcefully, and which garnered a lot of support sort of in social media terms. We'll come back to what you thought of the debate in a second. Steve Bryan is back. We spoke to Steve earlier on the phone. Yeah, indeed. Actually, yeah.
And I'm not 104 either.
And you're not 104 either, which is rather lovely. You've been a Conservative MP for Winchester for
9 years.
9 years now. You are a Hunt supporter.
Yeah.
What did you make then, Steve, of your man this evening? It's always going to be very difficult, isn't it, up against Boris Johnson. The sort of, when I say joker in the pack, I don't mean that as a kind of pejorative. I mean that he is that sort of, some say bubbly, some say bumbling, but either way, he makes a mark that few politicians can really match.
So look,
that must be worrying as a Hunt
just
supporter.
wish to blow the proverbial, but I have to say it was really good. Well done to Talk Radio and The Sun for doing that. Tom Newton-Dunn was on another channel the other day talking to Adam Bolton and the person who chaired the ITV debate, and he was asking for their advice as how to do it, and they said, make sure it's not all about you. And he did that. He nailed that tonight. He let the guys talk. He let the questions be asked, and then he let the guys talk. I thought it was a really good debate. It was really watchable. It was really enjoyable. For Jeremy, I thought he showed quite a lot of himself tonight, actually. That was deliberate. I think he showed a lot of his personality and a lot of his personal side, and also carried on being Jeremy Hunt, that I think is across the detail, that is the details guy. That's not a dirty word, as I said earlier on the phone to you, and who's ready, trusted, step up onto that world stage as our Prime Minister, sitting around the table at G7 and things like that. And I thought he came across really, really well tonight. I was really proud of how he did.
Emily, you have already voted for Boris Johnson.
I have
Yes.
voted for Boris.
Whenever we have any guests on, we go through, we employ private detectives to check social media accounts to see
Yes.
what's going on. Putting the
Oh,
prosecco aside,
Yes.
you are shown posting your ballot
I did.
into the post box to prove that you have voted. What did you? I mean, firstly, that you said off air that you thought that you agreed with Steve that the debate itself was the better of the debates.
Oh, it was great. It was so lively. Like you were saying before, there was a lot of interaction between the two. And I think one of the issues we've had in the past as Conservative voters is we've had a character like May, and she is a Maybot, excuse the phrase, but she doesn't come across as very personable. She kind of puts up this barrier that makes her seem like she's not actually human. I think tonight, seeing the kind of banter, the kind of normalness, it kind of shows that, these MPs in Parliament, they are normal people, and I think that's something that May's failed to do in the past.
So Boris Johnson is the man for you. Was there a point when you thought, well, maybe actually this Jeremy guy, it's too late for your vote now, but this Jeremy guy came across rather well?
Well, my
Very
vote was...
statesman, very considered.
course.
He's not doing the jokey stuff. He's not trying to pretend that, he's trying to get a laugh at every line.
Of course. I mean, my vote was very well thought out. It wasn't, a split decision. I didn't instantly go, Boris is the man at all, by any means. But I think tonight just showed the difference between the two. You've got one that's really, I personally feel, very passionate and very vocal about that, while Hunt's a lot more reserved. And I feel that many of his characteristics are very much like May. I mean, for example, the question about when was the last time he cried, he wouldn't admit to it, whereas Boris was very open and showed that human side that, he might cry if his bike's stolen.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Should we be
almost
worried?
more
Should we be
relatable.
worried about somebody who cries when their bike's stolen?
But then when
come
Jeremy said,
on.
"Did you actually cry?" He said, "Well, maybe my eyes got dewy," or some other clever word,
like
which
that.
I couldn't pronounce. I mean, honestly, when did the Prime Minister last cry? I don't know. Ask us. I mean, it's easily done. But I just thought it was a good debate. I thought Jeremy made the point tonight about charisma, didn't he? And he said, that charisma matters, but it's about actual detail, isn't it? And Boris is, in many ways, he likes to talk about optimism, but optimism's important, but it has to be credible, was Jeremy's line tonight, I wrote down here. And I think that was good. Jeremy showed a lot of optimism tonight, and he showed a different side to his character tonight. And I know it's a side to him that I know well. I've worked very closely with him and seen him very close up in big offices of state, and I've worked with him for years. That's why I support him.
I do think we learned more about Jeremy Hunt in tonight's debate. I think that's fair to say. But there was some interesting moments. So he said, at one point, as a Charterhouse boy, I'm never going to criticise Boris for going to Eton. So then started talking about his scholarship at Charterhouse, and so did Boris Johnson, to be fair.
Yeah.
But we had two men boasting about their public school scholarships on stage at a talkRADIO and Sun debate. Surely at that point you were just inwardly vomiting, weren't you?
Yeah, well, Bow Hunt School in Liphook in Hampshire was not quite Charterhouse or Eton, I have to say. I mean, you can't change where you came from. David Cameron always used to say that. I'm not interested in the decisions that Jeremy or Boris's parents made when they were 10, 11 years old. I'm interested in the sort of Prime Minister they're going to be. I'm interested in who is already trusted and respected on the world stage. And for me, that's Jeremy, and I think that's why he's ready to roll.
There was another slightly odd moment when Jeremy Hunt was talking about giving women a top 4 job in the cabinet, and he said to Boris Johnson, "You've such liberal views on gay marriage now, you'll fit in very well." What was that about?
I don't know what that's about, but he was saying that they were asked, weren't they, about the big offices of state, whether there should be a woman in one of the big offices of state. Of course there should. If there are good women in the front line, which there are, then why wouldn't there be?
But surely you wouldn't want to put a woman in there just because she's a woman.
Oh, exactly,
would you?
exactly.
That would be quite
That's what
insulting.
I think they were sort of. Maybe they didn't come.
There's an
across as
awful
they
lot
wanted.
of talented women out there who I'm absolutely sure would take one of those roles.
There are some fantastic female MPs on the backbenches at the moment, and there are some fantastic guys on the backbenches at the moment, and whoever is right for the job should get the job. And I think Jeremy and Boris both think that, and I certainly do.
What did you think, Emily, as a woman? Did you think when you heard that, were you...
So as a woman, I find it quite patronising, you know, the idea of like women only shortlist. I find that very patronising. I mean, I would not want to get a job based on the fact that of my gender, etc., etc. I was quite disappointed by both of them committing to having a woman in the top 4 positions. I think that's wrong. I mean, if you find the right woman for the job and they happen to be a woman, that's absolutely great. But on the basis that because of their gender that they get one of the top 4 roles. I think that's completely wrong.
And they've both committed to that now, haven't they?
Yeah,
so we will never know.
I'm a Boris fan, and
we will never
agree.
know now whether a woman who gets 1/4 of those top 4 jobs got it because they committed to it.
So Penny Mordaunt is already Defence Secretary, and I would think she has a very, very good case to remain as Britain's first female Defence Secretary, and she's there on merit as a brilliant Defence Secretary and a good friend of mine. So there's a good example of someone who's there for the right reasons.
Guys, we are out of time, but thank you. Nice to see you,
Nice to see
Emily
you.
and Steve Bryan, MP, with us. We'll talk to Priti Patel, who'll be live with us on Talk Radio next.
The Late Early Show.
On Talk Radio.
The time has come, the Paul Ross said, to talk of many things, this wild and whirling, wonderful world and the weird stories that it brings to us each and every weekday morning from 1 to 5 a.m. on the Late Early Show. You know what? We've already visited 55 countries. Join us for a fantastic trip of exploration right around the globe.
The surf report is there's not very many waves, but it's a beautiful day.
It's the stimulating radio encounter of the interesting kind.
But a lot of people just come for the sheer fun.
The Late Early Show with Paul Ross.
Transporting you to another plane.
Monday to Friday mornings from 1.
This is actually really, really cool.
On Talk Radio, you know it makes sense.
The final showdown, Jeremy Hunt versus Boris Johnson on Talk Radio.
We are taking your comments, and of course we are also digesting, looking over, picking over what happened in the last sort of 90 minutes here at Talk Radio Towers. We, of course, had that debate between two men. In fact, it was the last debate, the concluding chapter, the final showdown. Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt, who will get the keys to number 10. They battled it out. They took questions. They made their points known. They even talked about crying. They talked about 20,000 cops on the street. They talked about the Irish border, Brexit, dealing with Donald Trump, chlorinated chicken, another referendum. And on top of all of that, Jeremy offered Boris a job around his cabinet. Not once, but I think, 3 or 4 times?
Yeah, we had a huge series of banterous badinage exchanges about who would get what job and why.
At the very beginning of the programme, we spoke to Priti Patel, former cabinet member, of course, an MP, who's with us now in the studio. Evening to you.
Good evening.
You started off as a Boris Johnson supporter, and you're now going to tell us, big exclusive for Talk Radio, you went to the debate and you're now a Jeremy Hunt supporter.
I'm even more of a Boris Johnson
Is that right?
supporter. So
Okay.
I thought, as you've said, actually, in your introduction, it was a good debate on all sorts of issues. Yes, lively, quite entertaining as well. I think there's a bit of personality that came through too. But at the end of the day, look, this contest is going to be determined by Conservative Party members. They're the ones that have the vote. And we have to remember what are the things that they really care about. They care about Brexit, delivering Brexit. They want to see the country come together. They also want to see the Conservative Party get its licence to operate back all over again. And by that, I mean the chance to not just deliver Brexit, but do all the other things that Boris spoke about, delivering more police, delivering more education, investing in public services, people and communities. But also, the big thing will eventually become defeating Jeremy Corbyn when there's a general election and actually making sure that we can secure a Conservative agenda for our
just
country.
on all of those things, I mean, you're going to have to sort of put taxes up by about 30p, aren't you, in the pound on this to pay for all of this?
No, and I can say
billions on cops.
No,
and
Ian,
goodness
no.
knows what
So,
else.
I mean, I can say this because I am a former Treasury Minister. So I was in the Treasury in the days when there was a mass doldrum in this country, when George Osborne was Chancellor, and both David Cameron and George Osborne were sorting out the fiscal mess that we were in, focusing on deficit reduction. And because we have had 9 years of deficit reduction, which has been one of the hardest tasks of this government, we have fiscal headroom of approximately £25 billion. Now, that, of course, can and should be used, I think quite rightly, to really unlock the potential of our country and use that to support businesses when it comes to delivering Brexit. But also, we've got to start investing in people and in communities around the country all over again.
It might have to pay for a no deal when we're all skint.
Well,
and
I don't think
got a job.
well,
and
there's no way we'd
things
use.
are closing down and countries are legging it to other
absolutely
countries.
not. So first of all, on Brexit, we have been. Theresa May has already. Mrs. May has, committed £39 billion of our money to the European Union, to the Commission. Well, quite frankly, Boris is very clear that we should put conditions around that. We should have conditionality. I've been saying that for ages. And it's right that we do that. Yes, we pay to play to a certain extent to get the deal that we want. But the point about fiscal headroom, as any economist and any chancellor and anyone in government will know as well, you use that leverage basically to invest in people and communities. And I think a Conservative Prime Minister has to do that, because we still have to address all those reasons as to why people voted to leave. The economic disparity around our country, the fact that there are not enough jobs in the northeast and northwest. We're not investing in people in terms of skills, education, and we're not the job creating economy that we want to be as well. And so I think only Boris can actually do something about that, and also leverage the finances, our place in the world, to make us a really attractive place for foreign direct investment.
Prudie, why didn't Boris Johnson commit to bring down the total net migration numbers?
I don't think he has to, primarily because under Theresa May, that target has become so discredited, totally discredited. And I think actually failed policies in the Home Office have demonstrated that. The other reason why is that Boris has already spoken about having the brightest and the best in this country, making the United Kingdom attractive for people from overseas that have the right kind of skills and qualifications through the equivalent of a point system to come forward.
You want them to come down?
Well, I want to see... Look, I was on the referendum campaign. I've spoken very, very strongly about immigration in this country previously, that we have to have people with the right skills, not, as I recall from my time in DWP, where we saw accession countries from the European Union, people that basically couldn't get jobs in their own country, people that did not have to contribute to their own welfare systems in their own country, basically come to our country to undercut people in our labour markets and basically take jobs.
You want the net numbers to come down. Boris Johnson wouldn't commit to do that.
No, I want to see immigration in this country reformed. I've always spoken about having the brightest and the best. I was on that big red bus with Boris during the referendum campaign. I was out there campaigning for reform of our immigration system. I want to see people from the Commonwealth come over here, people with the right kind of skills.
So you're happy for net migration to rise?
Well, I think actually we will have the right type of immigration for our economy. And there's another issue here as well.
Even if net numbers go up?
I don't think they will go up, because...
But even if they did go up, you'd be happy with it?
They won't go up, because it's about time, and the government hasn't done this at all. They've been trying to talk a good game about this. We have to invest in our own people in terms of skills, vocational training and education. And I'm afraid that hasn't been happening to the extent that we need to get the rebalancing in our economy.
Just a very final point. If in 2 weeks' time you are offered a job around that cabinet table, I'm sure, just like our previous guests who said they're not bothered, you probably would like a job around the cabinet table. How will you know, if you got offered one of the big four, whether you got that because of your skills as a politician or because you're a woman?
Well, I wouldn't accept a job.
Because you'll never know.
Well, I wouldn't accept a job
But
on
they've
the
already
basis that I'm a
promised,
woman.
both of them.
Well, look. So I've worked for multinational companies around the world, okay, and I wasn't picked to do my job on the basis.
But you will never know if you've got one of the top 4 jobs.
I'm a big meritocrat, so I would trust the judgment, obviously, of whoever. But at the end of the day, I do believe in meritocracy, and I think that is so important in our politics as well as in the wider working world. And I just think the whole issue of tokenism in politics and job offers is actually.
So you were disappointed in Boris Johnson making that promise this evening?
It would demean the office, but quite frankly, so with Boris, I mean, to be quite frank with Boris understands meritocracy. He understands having the brightest and the best, and he understands making sure that you have a person that can do the job, and I think that's what a person should be judged on.
Priti Patel, thank you.
Thank
Good to see you. It is Talk Radio 0344 499 1000. We'll talk to the man of the moment as well. Tom Newton-Dunn, political editor of The Sun, will be with us in a couple of moments' time.
This is
Talk Radio. The Matthew Wright Show on Talk Radio with switchcraft.co.uk. Energy switching made smarter.
I switch considered opinion into agitated argument. I switch breaking news into high voltage debate. I switch on afternoon radios all across the UK.
Maybe you should switch to The Matthew Wright Show. Weekdays from 1 on Talk Radio with switchcraft.co.uk. Energy experts helping you save money year after year.
At Indeed, we understand that when it comes to hiring, it's important to have a large talent pool to choose from. But sometimes, too many good options can be overwhelming. That's why Indeed doesn't just give you access to a large pool of job seekers. We also offer screener tools that let you instantly narrow down your search. Hone in on hiring with Indeed. Experience Indeed for yourself today and get a free sponsored job upgrade on your first posting at Indeed.com/redeem. Terms and conditions apply.
At the Bank of Antandek, they're looking for a mascot.
We need an icon. Something that says high flying to all our mortgage customers.
Like a falcon or a stallion.
Or even better, a parrot. Check it out.
Meanwhile, at Santander, they're concentrating on helping customers find ways to take years off their mortgage with their overpayment calculator. See what's possible at Santander.
All applications are subject to status and our lending criteria. Your home may be repossessed if you do not keep up repayments on your mortgage.
It's not just our award-winning Peugeot van range. It's your dog grooming, lift engineering, espresso making, patio building, total and utter beating heart of your business Peugeot van range. Rely on advanced new grip models to tackle tough terrain. Add your personality with stylish new asphalt models. Whatever your business, all new partner, expert and boxer can handle it. Visit Peugeot.co.uk. Master the impossible.
Talk Radio, traffic and travel.
M62 East junctions 11 to 12 towards the Eccles interchange and the roadworks. The inside lanes closed by a police incident. Cardiff, Castle Street and Cowbridge Road East remain closed due to a demonstration. And on the M1 South junctions 17 to 16 towards Daventry, lanes 3 and 4 to 4 are closed with queues because of an accident. In Kent, the M25 anti-clockwise junctions 3 to 2, lanes 1 and 2 are closed by an accident. And in Plymouth, A38 the Parkway at the Forder Valley Road, the exit slip is closed by an accident. I'm Stuart Wood.
Morning. Sorry, Stevie's a bit poorly, so we won't be coming to nursery today.
OK, thanks for letting us know.
So I brought Max instead. I packed his favourite toy. He normally naps twice a day and loves playing outside.
Like getting your money's worth? Enjoy the delicious double cheeseburger. Just $1.59 from the McDonald's Saver menu. From 10:30am, price and participation may vary.
The final showdown. Jeremy Hunt versus Boris Johnson on Talk Radio.
22 minutes after 9. Good evening. It's Ian Collins and Ross Kemsel on Talk Radio. We are digesting and just looking over the 90-minute debate, but by far the most thorough debate we have seen, either from the televised versions or the hustings that we've had over the last few weeks. Tom Newton-Dunn, of course, political editor of The Sun, was hosting the man in the chair. Evening to you, Tom.
Good evening.
I mean, it's always tricky, isn't it, if you're going to moderate something like this and throw in the questions, because, all the questions there, you're a seasoned journalist, you've been doing this for years, you've been round the block at Westminster forever, etc. You know these people, but of course you can't prepare for what might happen there. I mean, anything could happen when you've got two men up against it, a couple of hundred people in the room as well, of varying persuasions and support levels. There's an unknown quantity about this.
Do you know what there really is? And I can tell you now, a couple of things did happen that we didn't expect. One of our excellent readers didn't ask the question that he said he was going to ask something completely different, which threw us a little bit. It was the second question. Another person we were going to get to ask a question, we thought it was so good, didn't turn up. So we had to change the questions around with half an hour to go. So, look, that's all about the performance on the night. I'm pretty pleased with it. I think we got a little bit more light out of the candidates. I suppose what surprised me more than anything else was how it was lacking in aggression. I really thought Jeremy Hunt was going to go for Boris Johnson. This is his absolute last chance. Interestingly, upstairs, talking to some of the spin doctors, some of the main players, Ian Duncan Smith, Dominic Raab still upstairs, having a few drinks up there. What was interesting is that they also thought this was Jeremy Hunt's last chance. So a lot of the votes have been cast already. A lot of the ballot papers would be in. But if Jeremy Hunt really wanted to stick a blow onto Boris Johnson, tonight was the night, and he just didn't do it.
What were you thinking? You were 5 foot away from them up close. You could see their body language. You could see the micro signals coming out of them. What were you thinking about their mindset tonight, both of them?
Well, interestingly, I talked to both of them a little bit beforehand just to say hello, how you doing, thanks for coming. They were both very, very nervous, very uptight, absolutely in the zone. That sort of last 15 minutes where they were both pretty much white as a sheet. I don't think they'd mind me saying that, and that's after the makeup was applied as well. And I thought, God, these guys are really going to go for it now. They're really, building up like a couple of prize fighters before they go into the ring. And then they came out on stage. Boris cracked a couple of his jokes. What was interesting, I think what I learned tonight, is how much the audience can really set the tone, interestingly. So you expect the tone to be set by the two guys on the stage. Actually, it's almost the opposite way around. That the audience, their reaction to the two participants will very much dictate where the participants will go. And I think if Jeremy Hunt did have any big attack lines. So I thought Jeremy Hunt was good tonight. You know, he said some really interesting answers, very human answers about his wife and kids especially. But if he did have any pre-prepared attack lines, maybe he didn't, maybe he thinks it's all over as well. But if he did, the audience tittering at Boris Johnson's jokes, because, you know, he does crack them. He's very good like that. You know, the nerves that I saw off stage disappeared entirely, and he was likeable Boris, you know, tickling everyone's underbelly then and there. Interesting, after you do that, it's quite hard to be Mr. Aggressive. It's quite hard for Jeremy Hunt to then come in and then really smack him on, because he will be worried about losing that crowd.
I thought something that was so fantastic is you said to them at the beginning, no interrupting, don't speak over each other. Now, there were some moments where both candidates spoke over each other, but they stepped back slightly from that interruptive style that we saw in the previous debates. Do you think that played into the sense that there wasn't quite as much aggression between them?
Well, the idea of having
How easy
debate,
did you find it to control them? Let's put it straight.
Well, there wasn't a huge amount of talking over each other and people getting angry with each other where you can't hear anything at all. I had a long chat with Julie Etchingham last week up in Manchester. I went to cover ITV's debate, which she hosted, and we all went to the pub afterwards. And I said, look, you've got to give me some tips here. I've never hosted a debate before. How does the thing really work? And she said, well, look, it can't be about you. Point number one, it's about them, and it's about opening them up, opening a tin can and allowing them to come out of it. But most importantly, she said she was completely obsessed with how the audience at home was reacting to this. And when you have two men talking over each other loudly, you can't hear a word.
What did you, as the debate was going on, what were you kind of deducing that you were going to get something out of these two? And what was the point when you realised, actually, this is a very different kind of... You mentioned the Julia Etchingham debate and the previous ones we've seen. Were you aware this was a very different sense, a very different feel from the candidates? They weren't at each other's throats, but in a way that gave a far more open and perhaps, dare I say, an honest debate.
Yeah, I think so. I think that came reasonably clear. I was waiting for Jeremy Hunt's haymaker. I have to say, I was waiting for the ITV debate. He came in like a prize fighter and threw a hell of a punch very, very quickly. And that never came. And I was surprised by that. And we got to about the third question of Brexit. And I suddenly thought to myself, right, he's not going to do this. What he did do, this is Jeremy Hunt, is he delivered some quite nice lines, some quite well thought out propositions. That says to me, he like Boris Johnson, has learnt from last week's debate. He's probably learnt that actually being a prize fighter and landing blows maybe doesn't work for him quite as well. Just like Boris Johnson learnt that actually losing your temper doesn't work for him. Being Boris, laughing stuff off, making other people laugh, that works. But if you're trying to upset and trip over the other guy, maybe that doesn't work so well. So it became quite obvious that there was a bit of a loving going on. Now, that I have to say bothered me, because we wanted to debate. We want them to disagree. We want some sparks to fly. It became reasonably obvious that the story was about the two of them actually agreeing far more than they disagreed about a whole load of things. And I think that probably tells us some quite interesting things about where Jeremy Hunt is on this contest and his chances of winning.
Really fascinatingly on Brexit, both candidates agreed that there wouldn't be a general election before Brexit was delivered, whatever that means, but they also ruled out a 5-year time limit on the backstop. They ruled out a unilateral exit clause. These are all options, general election backstop, that you might want on the table should you come to October the 31st and not be able to deliver your primary plans for both of them. The options are vanishing. They're both taking away their options.
Yeah, it was interesting. In a way, I suppose they box each other in on that. They don't want to be seen as more soft Brexit than the other. So Boris Johnson rules out a 5-year limit on the backstop, which is, quite frankly, I thought something that he would grasp with both hands. There is a way out of the backstop. Fine, we've got to wait 5 years. He didn't want to take that. Immediately, Jeremy Hunt, who's supposed to be the softer Brexiteer, the two of them said, nope, I wouldn't accept it either. I mean, both of them, I have to say, they've built themselves a one route only way through Brexit. And what we were trying to do in the Brexit section, all that, was try and pick apart how their plans do need a plan B. You do need an alternative if your renegotiation and then your tremendous ability to persuade the House of Commons, where you have a majority of 3, to get your plan through doesn't quite work. And I couldn't do that. And it was frustrating for me to not do that. But what does that tell us? That tells us that these two are completely hard over, and it's going to be an extraordinary 3 months we've got coming.
Just a very final point. We've had 3 senior politicians in with us: Ian Duncan-Smith, Dominic Raab, Priti Patel, all said when asked they're not interested in a cabinet position should Mr Johnson win. Do you believe them?
Not in the slightest. They're politicians.
It's Tom Newton-Dunn who was your. Do we prefer moderator, host, or chairman?
Whatever you want. Political Editor of the Sun. I'm going back
Well,
to the day job tomorrow.
You will always be that, which is fabulous. Tom, good to see you. Tom
Thank you.
Newton-Dunn with us here on Talk Radio. The time is 9:30, and we'll be back with more comment and analysis of the final showdown next.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
Talk Radio. Alistair Stewart in for Julia Hartley-Brewer on Talk Radio. The biggest breaking news stories, headline-grabbing guests, and razor-sharp opinion.
It's Alistair Stewart here. I'll be sitting in this week for Julia Hartley-Brewer, Monday to Thursday. I hope you'll be able to join me for a first look at all of the front pages of the newspapers, lots of business, lots of politics, and a little bit of mirth as well.
Alistair Stewart in for Julia Hartley-Brewer.
Tomorrow morning from 6:30.
On Talk Radio.
The final showdown. Jeremy Hunt versus Boris Johnson on Talk Radio.
You're listening to Ian Collins and Ross Kempsell here on Talk Radio, looking back at that big debate. Well, in fact, it was the final showdown, the very last time. It's a week tomorrow. We will find out eventually who becomes the leader of the Conservative Party and, of course, the next Prime Minister. Here's some comment coming through on Twitter. Belinda in York: I find it infuriating that so many people in the Tory party want to support Boris Johnson based on nothing more than his gregarious personality. Surely it should be about policy. I'm pretty sure most of those supporters know little about his policies, would tell you everything you need to know about the state of politics. This one in from Miles in Glasgow: Hunt has won most of these debates, but Boris remains the figure the Tories like. How many bad markers does he have to have against him before people see the light? This is no different to the cult of Corbyn in the Labour Party. And on that point, Ross Kempsell, just before we cross to Maidenhead, there is something in this, isn't there? There is a certain politicians. You could mention Trump, you could sort of mention Farage in this, you could certainly mention Corbyn, and you could probably mention Boris Johnson. There is a cult thing that follows them around.
So I think the Conservative Party is in this existential crisis and battle over its direction, not just on Brexit, so not just on the extent to which these candidates are hard Brexit or soft Brexit, which they're now eradicating the original demarcation lines on that, which it established 4 weeks ago. They're now rapidly diminishing as both rule out an election before Brexit, both rule out all of the other options. They're coming closer on that. But they are diverging on character. So Boris Johnson, you could say, has a more populist style. Jeremy Hunt, you could say, has a more traditional Conservative leadership style. And I actually think that part of the battle for the soul of the Conservative Party is about what kind of character, what kind of person they want as Prime Minister. Do they want to push down a populist route that feels and looks and is in tone more like Boris Johnson's kind of style? Or do they want to feel a tone that is more like Jeremy Hunt's? And that has been a key kind of overarching question throughout the entire campaign, which does fall into policy and does fall into the domestic differences between these two candidates on what they actually want to do. But it's really about what does the Conservative Party look like going into the next election. And that's influenced by what's happening in the United States, what's happened in Europe.
Sure.
It's a huge question for the Tories.
And speaking of Conservative Party members, let's cross to Maidenhead, to the Conservative Club. They're significant, of course, because this is Theresa May's constituency. Alex Dibble, Talk Radio reporter, is there with members of that constituency. They watched, and good evening to you, Alex, that you were watching the debate there and taking on the proceedings as they unfolded. What's been the response from members of Theresa May's own constituency? Evening.
Yeah, thanks very much, guys. Yeah, that is the big question, isn't it? We sat here, we watched the whole debate for an hour and a half, fascinating as it was. And Sam, Richard and Gurpreet, we spoke to you beforehand, so I'm going to get your thoughts afterwards. I'm going to say generic question first. Who do you think came across better, regardless of who you actually voted for in this leadership contest?
Sam Acklar saying Boris Johnson.
Boris Johnson?
Councillor Gurpreet Bhangra, Boris Johnson.
Okay, I can see where this is going.
Yeah, I thought Jeremy did a lot better, and it was a good-humoured debate, but I suspect...
And we appear to have just lost the line there to Maidenhead. right on the pivotal moment of what that voter suspected. We can only speculate what he suspected, Ross.
Yeah, we can. So we're talking to the 160,000 Tory members or so. We think there are 180,000 Tory members now, but not all of them can vote in the competition because you have to have been a Tory member for a certain period of time. But these are the people who are actually going to decide who the next Prime Minister is. And so much of the framing of this leadership debate, of the discussion around it, has been about which of these two men would be better to be a Prime Minister, which does the public prefer. Jeremy Hunt has sometimes come above Boris Johnson in those polls, whereas the intra-party Tory polls have shown Boris Johnson in the lead. The reality is that it's not a question for the public, as much as perhaps it should be. The fate of who's going to be the next Prime Minister is in the hands of Tory members, and it's largely now sealed. The majority of them have voted, and the official CCHQ totals are now catching up with where the campaigns think they are. And you know, there is a big question tonight. When we hear from these Tory members, do they regret changing their vote? Do they regret voting the way that they did? Is there any way for them to U-turn?
Let's go back to Alex Dibble, who was in the middle of talking to a speculating constituent of Maidenhead, Alex.
Yeah, that's right, guys. So there's an interesting point put in the studio here. Was there enough from Jeremy Hunt, do you think, to make you or any Conservative Party member change their mind and decide to vote for him rather than Boris Johnson?
Sam Ackler saying, I think that Jeremy Hunt's speech was very credible. I think he raised some really good points. I liked his points about, you know, helping the young get on the property market. I liked his points about, you know, Greenbed and the challenges we face, like building higher up, especially in London. So, yeah, I think that there will be some people out there that certainly will be backing him. And you know, if it wasn't for Boris, I'd probably my second choice would definitely be Jeremy Hunt. So.
Now, I've got to ask you, Sam, and you, Richard, because I hope you don't mind me saying, you both told me you've already voted for Boris Johnson. However, you both voted Remain. Now, Jeremy Hunt said this evening that if it needed a couple of extra days for, you know, a deal to be done, he would be willing to take those extra days. So, with a slightly softer position on that, surely I would expect you to be favouring that candidate over Boris Johnson. Why don't you? And I'm going to go to Richard first on that.
I voted Remain, partly because I knew it would be a total muddle trying to get it through the House of Commons. But having reached this stage, I'm firmly believing that we just have to get on with it. And it's a false question, really. I mean, quite clearly, if you're on the point of actually doing a deal on October the 31st, you'll run it over. But the fact is, you've got to make Brussels believe that we will go. And you've got the impression of the past 3 years that on one hand we've been sending negotiators over there to do deals, while we've got other civil servants in particular and other politicians going around and saying, no, we don't really believe it. It's all been made enfeebled and emasculated by other people.
You sound very much like the candidate that I know you voted for. And just lastly, guys, one thing that they did talk about was Trump and that relationship post-Brexit. Now, they didn't say he was a racist, but they strongly implied that what he has done recently is racist. Do you think that's wise, regardless of what they might personally think, to say that sort of thing, to strongly imply that when Donald Trump is going to have to be somebody that whoever wins this contest is going to be dealing with?
I think it's unfair to say, you know, talk about a racist comment or this or that, but I think, look, it was certainly an unhelpful comment. But, you know, at the same time, we need to be mindful, and we have to. He's a very important partner for us. The US is an important trading partner for Britain, and, you know, it's an important and very special relationship, one which we need to maintain. So, you know, saying things like, you know, racist comments, this or that, is not helpful. But certainly, I agree, and I like the fact they were honest and said, yeah, it was an unhelpful comment.
Guys, that's just a little bit of a flavour of what Sam, Gurpreet and Richard thought about the debate. We've been in Maidenhead Conservative Club, where the local MP here will step out of number 10 in a week's time and pack her bags, and they will all be replaced, shirts, shoes and all, by those belonging to Jeremy Hunt or Boris Johnson.
Good work, Alex. Thank you. Alex Dibble, Talk Radio reporter there in Maidenhead. This in from Tim, who says it's not about politicians having a cult following. It's about having a charismatic, confident leader. Hunt is May in a suit. Bland, bland, bland. No deal Brexit. Let's get the heck out of that slow car crash of a political project called the EU, says Tim. We're going to talk to Wendy Gregory in just a second, psychologist, on that issue of body language and what these guys look like. Just a point, Ross Kempsell, on specifically this business of not calling Donald Trump a racist. So they essentially sort of did call him a racist, but wouldn't use the term overtly in that respect. Is that kind of the right thing? Is it just all shades of wrong for a potential prime minister to come out unequivocally with that word? Is that what they were doing here?
I actually thought that Jeremy Hunt, tactically there, could have really boxed Boris Johnson into a corner. So Boris Johnson answered that question first, and he declined to say that Mr. Trump's comments were racist. Now, Jeremy Hunt then leant back on the fact that he's currently Foreign Secretary, and I'm sure that there are many Whitehall mandarins and officials who would balk at the idea of the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom calling the President of the United States a racist. That, by anybody's standards, whatever the context, would be an extraordinarily out of the ordinary comment to make. But he could have gone further than he did, and he would have made Boris Johnson look reticent on this topic. So instead of that, he almost helped Boris Johnson out. And there was another point in the debate where Jeremy Hunt did that. When Boris Johnson was being questioned on his personal life, Mr. Hunt again stepped into the question, almost to dig Boris Johnson out of that hole a little bit. So I do think the tone of this debate was more conciliatory as well when you look at it in the round. Both candidates agreed to go for a pint with each other after the competition. Both agreed on not launching military action against Iran. Both agreed on not having a general election before Brexit. Both agreed on not changing the political declaration to try to get around the backstop issue. Both agreed on numerous other issues. And I wonder whether we did see a little bit of peace breaking out towards the end of that debate.
I wonder if they did have a pint after the debate, because there was hospitality to be had. We'll try and get a definitive answer on that before the end of the programme. Let's speak with Wendy Gregory, psychologist and writer who watched the debate. Evening to you, Wendy.
Hi, Ian. Hi, Ross. I listened to it. I didn't watch it.
Indeed. So what do you make when you're hearing guys like this, top of their game, experienced politicians, but as Tom Newton-Dunn said when he came in beforehand, these men were very nervous. They've both been on the world stage. They've both spoken to mass audiences. They've both been on the TV more times than Ant and Dec in the last 3 weeks. So they shouldn't be nervous. What were you picking up from a psychologist perspective here? Where were those moments of weakness or those moments of strength?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of surprising to think that they would be nervous, as you just said, but really the pressure that's on them now, I mean, this is as high stakes as anything ever gets. It really is all or nothing for each of them. And I think for most of us, we wouldn't be able to cope with that kind of level of stress or pressure. So in a way, that's not surprising that they were nervous. But listening to them, I would have said neither of them sounded nervous. Boris, at times, I felt sounded a little flustered, especially when he was put on the spot about the comment he made about gay people, but not actually nervous. So I think the point is they are so well prepared and so well rehearsed that they always just come across as calm, or almost always. I think Jeremy, he introduced himself, I think, as sort of the calm person, the calm one, and they almost work a double act, actually.
That was intriguing, wasn't it, Wendy? Let me give you an insight into the kind of timetable that these two candidates are under. They are doing a huge amount of travelling around the country to various hustings. They're meeting members' associations every day, sometimes as many as 5 or 6 different visits. They then have to immediately drop everything to speak on the phone to a donor or to a senior ally. They're being badgered all the time. Their phones are going to be absolutely full of messages from MPs trying to get alongside them to ask for jobs. They're just absolutely from 6 in the morning till gone midnight every single day being besieged by everybody under the sun, including the media, including Tory colleagues. What kind of pressure is that? To give us a psychological insight, what is that?
That is extreme stress, and there's a definition. Pressure becomes stress when the demands placed on you exceed your perceived ability to cope with them. So it is very, very subjective. Most people you speak to, if you ask anybody you say, are you stressed? And they say yes. But what they actually mean by that is quite subjective. But it's clear that in the roles that they're in, they are actually able to deal with that, and their perceived ability to cope with those demands is that they can cope with them, whatever they are. It's not something I would like to do myself.
No, and then what are the kind of psychological associations of that? So if you believe you have the ability to cope with this kind of pressure, I mean, what else does that entail in terms of self-belief?
Well, they have remarkable resilience and remarkable self-confidence, and you could look at that in various ways. You could say they've very thick skin.
Yes.
They've opened up their lives, really, to public scrutiny in a way that would be absolutely abhorrent to most of us. And they can roll with the punches, and that does come from resilience, which really goes back to one's upbringing, to one's childhood, to how much you believed in yourself as a child, how much your family believed in you. But it's also to do with being presented with manageable challenges as a child and as a young person. So when children are growing up and they have no challenges, for example, if parents do everything for them and they never really have to do much for themselves, the parents are trying to protect them, but actually they grow up with very little resilience. So I'm guessing, well, I know a little of Boris's background, not quite so much about Jeremy's, but that they've both actually had to overcome quite big challenges in their lives. Well, we know that Boris has in his political career, but so that's where their resilience comes from.
Wendy, thank you for spending time analysing and having a look at that for us as well, and listening to that debate. Wendy Gregory, psychologist and writer, with some thoughts on what came through from a psychological perspective on the two men who want to be our next Prime Minister. You're listening to Ian Collins and Ross Kempsell on Talk Radio. The time is 9:45.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
Talk Radio. Driving Home with Eamon Holmes tomorrow afternoon from 4 on Talk Radio in association with Sun Savers, giving you cash, treats and prizes. It's the nation's one-stop destination for cutting-edge current affairs and the liveliest daily debate anywhere on the radio, all delivered with a legendary twist of Eamon. It's the roadmap of your radio commute. Driving Home with Eamon Holmes tomorrow afternoon from 4 on Talk Radio with Sun Savers, giving you cash, treats and prizes. Sign up to Sun Savers today at sunsavers.co.uk or download the free app.
You can pretend you want the spacious Alfa Romeo Stelvio SUV for its unparalleled driving pleasure, the 5-year warranty or the monthly payments of only £349 plus initial rental. But the real reason is, you just want an Alfa Romeo. Born to be experienced. Book your 24-hour test drive at alfaromeo.co.uk.
Personal contract hire, Alfa Romeo Stelvio Nero Edizione Petrol, £5,584 initial rental, 48-month term, 8,000 miles per annum. Valid until the 30th of the 9th, 19. T's and C's apply. Leases 24-hour test drive at participating retailers only.
If your car starts to break down on the motorway, always try to exit the motorway. If that's not possible, move left, get out of the flow of traffic, and if you can, get behind the barrier. Then phone for help. That way we can keep you and the motorway moving along safely, because we all want to be somewhere. Somewhere like being at home for the season finale of that series you're into. Keep safe. Wise up to breaking down. Search Highways England Motorways to find out more.
E.ON's just become the UK's largest 100% renewable electricity supplier, meaning 3.3 million E.ON homes are now backed by 100% renewable electricity. That's 100% electricity matched with 100% renewable sources. Not only is that 100% brilliant for our customers, it's 100% brilliant for the UK. So, are you ready to join the millions waking up to 100% renewable electricity every day? Find out more at eonenergy.com/renewable. E.ON. Tomorrow is on.
Talk Radio, traffic and travel.
On Merseyside at Bootle, the A5090 Hawthorne Road remains closed due to police incidents between Olivia Street and Ursula Street. Northamptonshire, the M1 South, junction 17 to 16 towards Daventry, lanes 3 and 4 are both closed with slow traffic due to recovery work following an accident earlier tonight. M1 Bedfordshire North, junctions 11 to 11A towards Dunstable, inside lanes closed by debris. And the M25 clockwise after 23 South Mims, there are 3 lanes closed and queuing traffic due to an accident. I'm Stuart.
Welcome, Mr. Jones. We have you and Mrs. Jones booked in for the anniversary package with the aromatic rose petal bath and the couple's massage. When will your wife be joining us?
She couldn't get out of work, so I brought Brian from football.
All right.
Like getting your money's worth? Enjoy the delicious bacon double cheeseburger. Just $1.99 from the McDonald's Saver menu. From 10:30am, price and participation may vary.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
The Matthew Wright Show, tomorrow afternoon from 1 on Talk Radio.
I'm Matthew Wright. Join me on Talk Radio. I'll be shaking up your afternoons with 3 hours of original current affairs conversation, unfiltered comment, and irreverent opinions.
Putting the world to rights. The Matthew Wright Show, tomorrow afternoon from 1
Always look on the right side of life.
on Talk Radio.
The final showdown, Jeremy Hunt versus Boris Johnson on Talk Radio.
10 to 10, Ian Collins with Ross Kempsell here on Talk Radio, looking at that debate, that final showdown. That was the last time those two politicians are going to be head-to-head in that sort of scenario. No more hustings, no more debates in that respect. That was the final one. It was by a country mile that superseded and usurped anything that had gone before us. And I know, again, allowing for the fact that we're sitting here, and you might say, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? Frankly, I genuinely believe that more came out of those two contenders this evening than we'd seen in the last couple of weeks.
We got very strong news lines on Brexit from both of them, so big news on Brexit, both ruling out an election, both ruling out changes to the backstop, which could have helped in October if the Prime Minister, future Prime Minister, whoever that is, found themselves in a difficult position. Big news line on immigration, Boris Johnson refusing to commit to bringing the net totals down. Big news lines on Iran, on that, both candidates ruling out any kind of military action, and a huge amount of agreement between the two candidates on some of those topics. Sure. A lot of touching base with each other, a lot of kind of banter between the candidates, a lot more engaged than we've seen previously, almost trying to, as a few of our guests have said this evening, try to play off each other a little bit, and almost a bit more like a sense of a double act rather than the candidates
there was
really
something
going for
about
each
that,
other.
wasn't there? There was something. We'll talk to Jonathan Portis in a second, Professor of Economic and Public Policy at King's College. First, Chris Curtis, Political Research Manager at YouGov. Good evening to you, Chris.
Good evening.
Just remind us so far what the, bearing in mind Conservatives members are the only people that can vote on this, but what have polls shown up till now, the state of play between Boris versus Jeremy?
So YouGov, we've done 2 polls amongst the Conservative Party members. So this is the 180,000 people who get a vote in this leadership election. We did one towards the start of the campaign and then one at the end of the campaign. And in both occasions, we got exactly the same result, which was Boris Johnson on 74% and Jeremy Hunt on 26% of the votes. That's a 48-point lead for the current frontrunner, Boris Johnson. That means that he's looking at getting about the same share of the vote as Vladimir Putin achieved in the last Russian.
So this is what would be called a
big margin.
This is, I'm sure he will resist the Putin comparison beyond that point. But this would be called a landslide, of course, if it were transposed into sort of an election scenario.
I mean, even by landslides. It's a large landslide. Yeah. It's quite a decisive landslide. Even by, if we look back at the Labour leadership election 3 years ago now, Jeremy Corbyn managed to get 62% of vote. That was significantly less. That was a landslide. What we're currently seeing in the polling is that Boris Johnson has a commanding lead. Obviously, these polls are a couple of weeks out of date now, and things might have changed slightly over that period, but constantly over this campaign, he has been by quite some distance.
So there's not necessarily any evidence to show that if Jeremy Hunt has a particularly good night, that would significantly change the perception of voters in this respect.
Well, in our poll a couple of weeks ago, 8 in 10 voters told us they had already made up their mind about who they would vote for in this leadership election. And I think the thing to bear in mind is that the key thing that is driving support for Boris, he hasn't always actually been the most popular politician amongst Conservative Party members, far from it. But the key thing that is driving support for him at the moment is that he is seen as the candidate who is most likely to get Britain out of the European Union by October 31st. And he is seen as the candidate by quite some distance who would be prepared to take Britain out of the EU without a deal if necessary. Now, Conservative Party members see Boris Johnson as willing to do those things. They do not apply those qualities to Jeremy Hunt. And throughout this campaign, and I think even including this evening, there has been no evidence or not enough evidence to change Conservative Party members' minds.
Chris, it's Ross Kempsell, the political editor for Talk Radio. I've been going to all the hustings, and I have to say that this is completely anecdotal and it's not scientific, so it's not going to be in the kind of quantitative form that you deal with. But on the ground, it does appear, it does feel, if you speak to Tory members, that many of them have a more mixed view, or they will say more pleasant things about the candidate which they haven't voted for. It feels closer on the ground than it does in some of the numbers. Is there a chance that the numbers could be wrong? What's the margin of error? I mean, we've had polling errors before. Is there any chance at all of a big upset here?
Well, I mean, look, there are lots of reasons why we've had some polling errors in recent years. And also, polling amongst Conservative Party members is a very difficult thing to do. We're trying to get a sample of 1,000 of them. And there's only 160, 180,000 of them in the country. And we haven't had... Opinion polling's been happening since the 1940s, and it's had lots of tries, lots of occasions to go out there and try and work out what's going on. We've only really had 2 leadership elections amongst the Conservative Party electorate, so 2 previous occasions to work on our methodology. So, I mean, it isn't as tried and tested as our national voting intention figures are. Having said that, the opinion polling has generally been very good in these leadership elections. It was good in the Labour leadership elections, and also the polling. And also when you're seeing these kind of leads, when you're seeing a 48-point lead for Boris Johnson, it may be closer, but it has to be a hell of a lot closer for this race to even be close. So I think as things currently stand, we see this in the betting markets as well, Boris Johnson is the overwhelming favourite. And I think based on all of the data we can see, that's a fair analysis.
So it would have to have gone horribly wrong for that to be so different. Chris, thank you for your time, sir. Chris Curtis, Political Research Manager at YouGov. Let's get a sort of economic perspective on this as well. Jonathan Portis, Professor of Economic and Public Policy at King's College. Jonathan, good evening.
Good evening.
Would I be right in saying that both candidates, perhaps more so Mr. Johnson, appear to be spending quite a lot of money at the moment, and we're not absolutely sure where it's all coming from?
That's absolutely right. Both candidates have made some pretty extravagant spending promises, particularly for tax cuts. I'm not sure it's entirely fair, actually, to say that particularly Mr. Johnson, in fact, Boris Johnson has said he wants to cut tax for basically high-earning people, people like me, and give us quite a lot more money. But he's been pretty clear where that's coming from. It's going to come from extra borrowing and presumably from less public spending.
Well, Priti Patel told us earlier, and I don't think I'm misrepresenting what she said, there was somewhere in the coffers, there was £25 billion floating around.
Well, that's simply an invention.
Fiscal headroom, I believe, is the phrase.
That is headroom that that within his current fiscal rules, the Chancellor has put aside to that within the current fiscal rules you could use if there was a no deal, but it's a contingency for no deal, not a bunch of £5 notes sitting in the safe at the Treasury. And I think Mr. Johnson has been pretty clear, actually. What he would do is tear up Philip Hammond's fiscal rules, particularly in the event of a no deal, which is actually economically quite sensible. What is less sensible is the idea that you would tear it up in order to give tax cuts to well-off people like me rather than to spend more on the NHS. But I think actually Jeremy Hunt has actually been, if we're more in fantasy land than Boris Johnson, because he has claimed that his corporation tax cuts, the very large giveaways to companies, would pay for themselves. And there is not a single economist anywhere on the political spectrum who thinks that adds up at all. So I think Johnson is actually, I think there's lots to criticise in Boris Johnson's plans, but he's at least being relatively honest about them, whereas Jeremy Hunt is simply inventing numbers.
Jonathan Portis, Professor of Economics and Public Policy at King's College, London. Thank you very much for your views.
And that is it from us. Thank you, Russ.
Thank you, Ian.
It's been a colourful evening of debate and response and high-profile politicians. And when they speak, they come here to Talk Radio. You saw it, you heard it. You can watch it back online as well. Make sure talkradio.co.uk is where you'll find highlights. And, of course, on Twitter as well, at Talk Radio. That's it from us. Coming next, Ian Lee.
Talk Radio.
Contact Talk Radio. Call 0344 499 1000. Text Talk and your message.